And this is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Progress 127. And we are here every Saturday from 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time and 2 to 5 West. We have a couple of guests tonight for the first hour. We have guests for the second hour, and we have guests for the third hour. Okay? So you got a lot to listen to tonight. But remember, you subscribe to this station. A lot of you send me emails all the time with all kinds of opinions. And I want to make sure that you follow through and, call me up if I ask for phone calls. Now, I do get a lot of calls, but it's never enough. I'd like to get a lot, full switchboard all the time. Number here is 866-997-4748 when we go to calls later. Remember, if you want to get in touch with me about anything, find out anything else about my career, what I'm doing now, what I did before, books, radio shows, other things, go to my website, Fader Files, FederFiles.com. Also, there's a blog that I write all the time, a political blog about stuff we talk about on this show and other things political. And you can, pitch right in there and give me your opinion or debate with me or post things, whatever you want. And that's called Occupied Territory. It's on Facebook. So if you happen to be on Facebook, you can check it out. I think you have to. I don't know if you have to actually be a member of Facebook to participate in this blog, but it's Facebook and Occupied Territory. Just Google that and you get to it. All right. So every week on this show, it seems like every week, and I think that's what's happening is, I tell you all kinds of stuff. We have experts on here, activists, people who have different organizations, authors. And we talk about, generally speaking, how the government and how the general culture and how the politics of America and internationally are anything from screwed up to horrendous, and how we, as citizens of the country or citizens of the world, can do our best to try to be better citizens, to fix the place, to make it a better country, right? And there's all kinds of ways to do it. And I'm going on about, did you vote for a third party? You can use massive civil disobedience. You don't like the way the government's going, and after all, we have that right, it seems to me, in our Declaration of Independence and free speech. You can run people in primaries to pull the Democratic Party over to the left if that's what you want. But there are other ways to participate in the system, or not to participate at all. For instance, there are organizations and there are people in the country who want to secede from the United States because they're so sick of it and it doesn't do what they want. It doesn't represent them, they feel. And don't we all feel that our government doesn't represent us? Everybody feels that way these days. But another way to do it could be to maybe form a new state out of a series of counties in your own state that don't seem to be represented either by the state capital, the state itself, or by the federal government. And we have two people on tonight who are, interested in doing just that. We have Jeffrey Hare, who is from an organization called 51st State Colorado. And then we have Scott Strelczyk, who is he's the leader of something called the Western Maryland Initiative to form a new state out of the 5 western counties of Maryland. We got a problem with a buzz in the headphones. Can you hear that? Is it the phone? Okay. So, Jeffrey, how you doing? Scott?
Good, Mike. Good, sir. How are you?
Okay. I think we got good signals from both of you there. Are you on regular phones or cells or what?
Yep, landline.
Landline? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'll tell you what, just flipping a coin here. Let me start with Jeffrey Hare. It's Hare. And Jeffrey is, by the way, CPA. And let's see, several generations in family have been farmers. Lives in Colorado, obviously. Where in Colorado?
Northern Colorado, or actually Weld County, or the city is actually Greeley.
Really? And, okay. And you are in the head of a business called, is it ERP Risk Advisors?
That's correct.
And what is that firm?
We do software security consulting for large enterprise software implementations.
Okay. And you're not one of the people who was advising on the healthcare rollout, are you?
No. I wouldn't take credit for that if I was. I can tell you that much.
All right. And then we have Scott, who is the executive producer and co-host of a weekly radio program called The Forgotten Men. What is that show about?
Well, it's about viewing everything through the lens of the Constitution. And in fact, Mike, I would say a lot of what you were saying leading into this about civil disobedience and our rights under the Declaration and so forth, we tend to agree with. I mean, we are on our show equal opportunity bashers of the right and the left, and mostly the right because they say they want limited government, but they really don't want limited smaller government. They want their version of big government.
So they're not really following through on what you think they should. So the show, The Forgotten Men, is broadcast on WFMD, and that's in Frederick, Maryland. When is the show on?
So it's on today. It's on every Saturday from noon to 2 p.m. So, in fact, I just got back from the studios an hour or so ago.
Okay.
Yep.
And you are, it says here, I'm reading from your own bio, you're a constitutionalist, and you teach Constitution classes. Where do you teach?
I teach in the community, so there are groups that are interested in it, and they put together a minimum number of people, and I go out and teach the class.
Okay, and you have a blog called A Citizen's View?
That's correct.
Okay, and the leader of Western Maryland Initiative. So, Jeffrey, what I'll do is I'm going to do it this way. Jeffrey, I'm going to get some ideas about what it is locally in Colorado that you want to do, and then Scott, we'll go to you, and you can tell me, locally in Western Maryland what you want to do, and then I have sort of more general questions that you can both pitch in. How's that sound?
Sure.
Okay, so Jeffrey, 51st State, Colorado. What is the organization? What, more importantly, why do you want to form a new state? And exactly, where are you located? What are the problems? And what areas will form the new state? And why do you want to do that?
Sure, that sounds good. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show today.
Sure.
So we're in the north, primarily right now. The movement is in the northeast part of the state, all rural communities for the most part, with a strong agricultural influence, certainly in Energy County as well. There's several counties that have oil and gas activity or coal mining as well. Mm-hmm. So, we like to frame this best in the terms of it's really kind of an urban versus rural divide, if you will. And this is not, I think Scott will talk about something similar in Maryland, but it's certainly not unique to what's happening in Colorado. There is this urban versus rural divide throughout the country. And we kind of liken, if we go back in a little bit of history, if you go back to 1964 when the one man, one vote U.S. Supreme Court came down that forced all state legislatures to be allocated, or the houses of the state legislature to be allocated by population. As the urban areas have grown, so the population has almost doubled since 1964 to modern day, and most of that area has come in the urban corridors. And what essentially has happened is the rural communities throughout the country, but particularly in our area, have really lost their voice in the legislative process. So our movement right now is 11 counties. There is 10 in the northeast part of the state, one in the northwest part of the state. We believe we'll be connecting those eventually to make a contiguous state. We're very early on in the process. We've been at this for about 4 months. So as we continue to educate people on why we need to do this, and what the future of the future structure, if you will, of the 51st state would be, we feel like we'll pick up some more momentum. But it is, as Scott and I think we'll talk about a lot today, it is really trying to bring government back to a more local level so it can more reflect and respect the values. What we flat out deny is a federal government telling all the states what to do, and even within certain states, this again, a one-size-fits-all solution for everybody in the state.
Well, then you're also talking, I think, about state capitals, which are more urban or urban viewing, telling other people within the state what to do, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
and just to give an example of why this isn't really a Republican versus a Democrat issue, you have two states adjacent to us, Nebraska and Kansas, that have a very disenfranchised rural community with a dominant, quote-unquote, Republican, urban-based legislature. So it's best characterized, if you want to think about it, the divide is urban versus rural, but it is also best characterized by what's the philosophy of government. Is it a large, centralized government that has control, whether the federal government control all over the state, over all the states, or a state state capital controlling everything that's happening in the state, versus more local control that can reflect the values in those communities.
Well, obviously, this is not a new thing. This has been going on since the beginning of the formation of the United States, urban versus rural. So let me ask you two questions before I move on to Scott and get his details. What is the estimated population of the amount of people that would be the 51st state you're talking about?
Well, as it stands right now, we have 11 counties with the question on the ballot, and it only represents about 350,000 people right now. But as we project it out to where we think the movement's going in our state, picking up even some urban areas that more like this more localized control of government that we're asserting as the proper role of government, we think will be close to 2 million people.
Oh, really?
Population at that point.
What's what's the entire population of Colorado?
I think it's around 5 million.
Okay, so you're projecting 2 million that would fit into this area you're talking about, right?
Right.
Okay, so next question, and then we'll move on to Scott. Do these areas in the aggregate get more back in taxes than, aid or whatever, development from the state government than they pay? Or is it the other way around?
Well, in aggregate, we believe we pay more into the state than comes back, but there are isolated cases where rural communities are getting more that they put in individually to the state than they get back. So I guess it depends if you look at it individually or holistically. All
right. So let's go to Scott and get some details here. Scott, and it's the Western Maryland Initiative. Now, what's the population of Maryland?
So the population is about 5.8, 5.9 million.
And the number of counties or the areas that you're talking about to form into a state, are they all in Maryland?
Yes. So there's 5 counties. There's 24 total jurisdictions in Maryland, 23 counties plus Baltimore City. The 5 westernmost counties, starting with Carroll, moving westward all the way to Garrett, that comprises 653,000 people. Mm-hmm. So we would not even be the least populous state. Wyoming has 570,000, and Vermont has about 626,000. So our population would certainly not be the smallest.
And the taxes, in that general aggregate area, do you think people are paying more in the aggregate in that particular thing you're talking about than they're getting back in services and money from the state?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Some people believe that the state sends more into those counties, and others say they don't.
Well, there must be a fact that verifies it.
That's the difficult part is you could get about 80% of that data correct. The problem is the remaining 20%, because it's hard to track the revenue source directly to the funding source, right? Mm-hmm. It's not as straightforward as you might want to think it is. Now, but here's my position anyways. Let's assume they're correct and more money comes into our 5 counties, okay?
Yeah.
Then it's a win-win if they let us go. Maryland's got huge fiscal problems. It will help them out to stop spending money out here. And us rural folks out here, we can figure out how to take care of ourselves. We will thank you for your paternalistic concern, but we are adults and we can figure out how to take care of ourselves. So I see it as a win-win if they indeed are sending more money in.
So just generally, and then I guess we'll have to, since we're all 3 of us in different places, spread out all over the country here, we'll just have to sort of figure it out as we talk so we don't all jump on top of each other. One thing is that, and I think maybe, Jeffrey, you might feel the same way as Scott does when he lays out some of these issues. You talk about here gerrymandering of districts, right? That's a problem for rural districts, is it?
Yeah, can I respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a really significant problem here. So again, we have 24 jurisdictions. If you take 4 jurisdictions, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County, that makes up 76 of 141 delegate seats and 25 of 47 state Senate seats. Mm-hmm. So it's been gerrymandered in such a way that even if you could win all 20 other jurisdictions, you still cannot change anything in the state. And what I like to describe is through the normal electoral process, we can't change anything because the way the delegate districts are drawn, the state Senate districts, and the federal congressional districts are drawn in such a way, it's to ensure one-party political power, and really out of 3 and 4 jurisdictions.
No, this happens nationally. It's a disgrace already. The national parties, both of them, do this when they're
absolutely,
right.
And I agree with you completely. I think gerrymandering does a disservice, and this is why you get so many discontented and disenfranchised people. Look, we can't even get people to register to vote in these counties, and the reason why they tell us this, they don't think their vote matters in this state because it's controlled by 3 or 4 jurisdictions. They won't even vote. They won't register to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how bad that is for our form of governance and our political system, that people are so disenfranchised that they won't even consider doing it.
Jeffrey, is that the same problem where you are?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the urban corridors throughout the what we call the I-25 corridor from Fort Collins all the way down to Pueblo have all the political power. Essentially, the same comments without even going into detail with Scott is. We look at it as it's urbanization of America, and whether those urban areas are Democrat or Republican, the urban corridor control the entire vote and disenfranchise the rural communities throughout the rest of the states.
Well, this urbanization that you're both talking about is something that's going on all over the world and has been going on for the last couple of 100 years. I mean, this is sort of seems to be some kind of, I don't know, maybe not necessarily a good one, but it's kind of almost like a natural phenomenon that's occurred in societies everywhere, especially in this country. I think maybe if you go back 100 years, you could flip it on its head. You know, the number of people who were in cities versus country was the opposite 100 years ago, but that's how rapidly it's happening. So if you have most of the population, or you shouldn't say a lot of the people who have power and money, because that's part of the problem you're both talking about, and I feel that way. But if you have a greater part of the population living in certain urban areas, should they not have more say in what happens in their state?
Well, so there's a couple of responses to that.
Okay.
So first of all, the way that gerrymandering is done, it's done in such a way, for instance, and I'll just give you an example. Let's say you have certain parts of a state that have more Republicans registered than Democrats, just as an example, or vice versa, either way. And one party's in power. What they do is they draw the districts to take slices out of where you may have more people registered for one party than another and move them in smaller quantities to other districts so that you dilute their entire base, right? That's the problem with it, and it's a huge problem. Secondly, I would just add to that, if you think back to when the Constitution was ratified, remember, we only had 13 states plus the Northwest Territories, right?
Right.
So they put in the Constitution a process for states to divide up and to erect new states out of existing states because they knew the population would grow. They already knew, as you mentioned at the top of your show, there was huge differences back then between the urban areas and the rural areas. So they wanted a peaceful way for people to be able to have self-governance, right? And all these movements are all about the right of self-determination and the right of self-governance as it's articulated in the Declaration of Independence and in Maryland, in the Maryland Declaration of Rights.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go over one thing. There's by the way, Jeffrey, what is there a website for your place?
Yeah, 51ststate.org, so number 51ststate.org.
51ststate.org. Okay, and Scott, yours is what?
It's freewesternmd.org, and it's still under construction. It's up. There's a shell there. Mm-hmm. There's some basic stuff. But we should be complete in a couple weeks. Now,
I'm just going to read this is from your FAQ, your facts.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. The question is, have new states been created from existing states? And you say, yes, this has been done several times in our history. Maine separated from Massachusetts, Kentucky from Virginia, Tennessee from North Carolina, West Virginia from Virginia, Vermont from New York, and Alabama and Mississippi from Georgia. The last occurred in 1863. Why is it that we've had all that in-between period where nothing has changed?
Well, I mean, a lot of the country wasn't settled at that point, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, remember, there was no way in 1787, in 1788, when the Constitution was ratified, for anyone to know that, Jefferson would have acquired the whole Louisiana territory, right? Mm-hmm. There's no way to know that all that expansion was going to happen westward. So what they built in, remember, our framers and founders had a long history of they understood how governments ran in Europe, right? I mean, there were monarchies, there were kings, there was divine rights and hereditary rights and so forth. And a lot of changes in government there were done violently, right? I mean, it was through violent revolution that change occurred over there. They weren't so peaceful. And they were very concerned about peaceful transition of power. And they built in an electoral process to ensure we have a peaceful transition of power, and also built in, as I mentioned before, a method for states, because people grow and change, and we have diverse people, diverse needs, interests, wants, talents, everything. They have different needs, and they want to be governed in a manner that comports with their views. So when you have rural people being governed by people in cities hundreds of miles away where they really have very little in common, this is why you're seeing this movement. And it really grows because they're frustrated because they're denied essentially through the electoral process, through gerrymandering, any way of doing anything about it through the normal process.
Well, I mean, I think people feel that way on a national basis. I mean, the country, most of us, when I say us, I mean everybody except the people who seem to be owning and running Washington, have a certain way that even people in rural areas versus urban, right versus left, we all have certain, like, for instance, let me pick one out of the air, which is something that I'm on the left-wing channel here, right? But I get more and more calls from people who identify themselves as right-wing, whatever these labels mean. Everybody's united on this NSA thing. That the federal government is spying on us. So we all have that. So there must be certain things that we all have in common. But you're saying that. Let me get to another question though, and this maybe Jeffrey, you can respond to this, and Scott, you could come in. And this is on one of those question and answer things you have. It says, what is to stop states from continually dividing until a state consists of a few people or a few hundred people? Jeffrey, why don't you answer that? I mean, what if you form this new state and then suddenly somebody becomes you in your state and wants to have a smaller state?
Well, I think that's the right of the people to determine that. They've got to be able to make the case that they can be self-sustaining, so that there's an economic case that they've got to do. So I think there's nothing wrong with that. We'd be supportive of that over time is to make political subdivisions smaller and smaller, so it does reflect and respect the values of people in those communities.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just add to that for a moment, because I get asked that question frequently, right? And logically, you could say, why not take it down to the household level and make every household a state, right? If you really wanted to go to an extreme, right? So the answer is size and scale matters, okay? And it matters in our form of governance. When you look at representation under the original Constitution, in the House of Representatives, there was one person for every 30,000, okay? Today we now have about 730,000 to 1, roughly 25 times the size, okay? If you apply today's ratio to back when the Constitution was ratified, do you know how many people would have been in the House? 4, okay? 4 people. They never would have ratified the Constitution because that was not their idea of governance, okay? Now, let's apply that to a jury. A jury has 12 people generally. It could be smaller in some states, but 6, 8, 10, 12, somewhere in that ballpark. And you need a unanimous conviction, right?
Or a majority, depending on the kind of case it is. Yeah,
but let's just say it's a criminal case.
Okay.
It's unanimous, right? Imagine a jury 25 times the size of what it is today. 300 people, and you have to get a unanimous conviction.
But if you form new states, and there are more states, let's say there's 20 more states that get formed. If you two are successful and other people are successful, then you have, let's say, 70 states or something, for instance. You're going to have that many more representatives in the federal government and that many more senators? I mean, who needs them?
The representation doesn't change because that's by population, so that's essentially the same in the House.
So what about the Senate?
The Senate would change, but let me get...
Do we need more senators?
No, but here's the bigger problem, Mike. Yeah. Let me just explain it. And I think you'll agree with this, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. Most issues today get nationalized, either through legislation or through the court system. And what happens is, every issue gets decided and jammed down the throats of 310 million people, right? And so whenever the R's are in power, the other half is mad. When the D's are in power, the other half are mad. And I'd like to equate this to, and I'll give you an analogy. Imagine Congress passing a law that says the only flavor of ice cream has been chocolate chip, okay? President signs it into law, goes through the court system, and the Supreme Court upholds it. So now everybody, 310 million people, have to eat mint chocolate chip ice cream if that's what they eat, okay? Now, imagine states. Instead of 50, imagine 100, 200, 300 states, okay? And if you want to live in a state, for instance, that's way left on the political spectrum and governs that way, you go live there. And if somebody else wants to live on the opposite side, they go live there, and then you have hundreds of flavors in between. It is the Baskin-Robbins of governance. And if we stop nationalizing every issue and return this to really the American system of federalism, where more of the control is in the states where people can live the way they want, this is how you stop pitting brother against brother and neighbor against neighbor and trying to jam policies down the throats of 310 million people. Stop that.
But wouldn't you say, and maybe Jeffrey, you could start the answer to this, wouldn't you say that there are certain things, people evolve, in our own personal lives, we evolve as we get older, right? We cast away things that are childish as we become adults. And one thing that we learn when we get older, and you could say this like in a family or in a community group or a church group or in a state or in a government or in a country, is that we have a lot of things in common and we have to look out for each other. And somebody has to be in charge of any organization, like, for instance, Jeffrey or Scott in your organizations or your radio show, whatever it is, or your business. Somebody's the boss, right? Somebody's got to be in charge. There has to be, in other words, centralization, or else you wind up with everybody running in every direction and nothing gets achieved. Isn't it almost inevitable? How do you deal with the fact that we have a huge population and there are issues which cross state boundaries, like, for instance, air pollution, water pollution, the way that the country conducts wars or recruits its military? There are certain things that have to be national, correct?
Well, I think that's arguable about what has to be national, and that really should be driven by the powers delegated under the Constitution, right? I mean, that's how we're supposed to operate. But I would just say, just because we have more states, remember, under federalism and states versus the national or federal government, the federal government is supposed to have X powers and everything else is supposed to remain in the states. I don't see how you continue to centralize and consolidate power when you have so many diverse people, right? And if you would argue for centralization at the country level, why wouldn't you argue for centralization of one world government then?
I might.
Okay. See, I'm not a centralization guy. I believe in decentralization.
No, I'm not interested in centralization for the sake of, and although maybe it's inevitable that this happens, and I could see your side of the argument, I'm not interested in centralization because then it would give some people more power, or because I have a certain political point of view or certain leanings. I don't want everything to be centralized to achieve a certain goal. I'm just trying to be practical. If you have so many people running into each other and doing different things and working at odds with each other. For instance, I don't know how the two of you feel about this, but I feel very strongly that basically, we're poisoning the whole planet and frying ourselves alive with global warming. This is clearly a world issue that has to be coordinated on a world basis. Everything can't be divided and everybody go about their own business.
No, but we're really talking about governance here, right? And we're talking about, for instance, when you look at, I certainly will speak for Maryland, when you look at our rural areas, ours is mostly agriculture. There's some mining. There could be potentially some oil and gas things, so forth. But the people there are very different from the people in Bethesda or Bowie or Baltimore City. We want to govern ourselves in a particular way. Let me give you an example. We have our legislature just passed a rain tax here, okay?
Oh, rain tax? What's that?
A rain tax says if a drop of rain hits your roof or hits your driveway, you have to be taxed on it.
Well, wait. You have to be much more specific about that, because now you're talking about something that sounds like fantasy or a joke.
This really happened. So, and here's the other part of it. So
what about, so wait a minute. So people in the whole state of Maryland, like if stuff falls on an apartment building in Baltimore, they get taxed too?
It's even worse than that. They decided that we're not going to make every county pay for this. We're only going to institute this tax on the 10 largest counties.
The 10 largest in terms of population or size?
In terms of, I don't know if it was revenue or size. I don't recall off the top of my head, Mike. But here's the thing. I live on a well, and you know as well as I do, water, if you want to survive, you need water, right? Mm-hmm. You can only go 3 days without water. So that is my life source. That's how I get my water. And they're saying if a drop of rain hits my grass, it's okay. But if it hits one drop to the left and hits my driveway, it's a pollutant, and we're not going to tax you. Okay.
I have to confess, I'm totally lost here. I have no idea what you mean by a rain tax or what they mean by a rain tax. Does this have something to do with the way water is collected for people to use?
Yeah, no. So what they're saying is because these are impervious surfaces, that it's going to run off, and it's the cause of all the pollution in our Chesapeake Bay, and this is how we're going to abate it. And it's wrong. It's not the cause of the pollution in the bay. And secondly, the fact that when you look at counties like the county I live in, if you look at the land mass, only 4% of the land in our county is impervious surfaces, and half of that is exempted because it's state and county roads. So we have 2% of our surfaces being rooftops, driveways, sidewalks.
Yeah.
Even if you abated 100% of it, it would not make a dent in any issue in the Chesapeake Bay. But yet they are taxing only 10 counties. How is that equal protection under the laws?
Mm.
I mean, this is craziness, right?
Well,
are they going to tax us to breathe next?
Well,
they might.
Let me ask the two of you, and then we'll start with Jeffrey. So how, let's say, Jeffrey, you form a new state. What would be the name in your new state? Do you have any ideas yet?
Well, the idea is potentially New Colorado. I just want to chime in really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Prior discussion. So, I think that we don't argue that there is a role for the federal government. There's a role for state government. There's a role for local governments. I think that the problem is that the federal government has grown well beyond its enumerated powers over time, well beyond quote unquote the consent of the governed. That we all, we go back to the Declaration of Independence. Instead of deriving its powers from the consent of the government, it has taken those powers from the states and from the people. And I think there obviously is a constitutional process to expand the powers of the federal government through amendment to the Constitution. So those things should be valid discussions at a state level, in essence, to determine what powers belong in the federal government or what additional powers belong beyond that. So it's not that there isn't a process to expand the powers of the federal government. It's just that it hasn't been followed.
So basically, if these two new states get created, then you're still part of the government of the United States, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So how, let's say in this new state, start with Jeffrey and then go to Scott, how do you raise money to pay for things that you absolutely need? Like, for instance, maybe state police or state highways or whatever.
Well, we have a pretty robust economy as it stands within these 11 counties. When we get to 25 or 30 counties, it'll be even more robust. So I think it's a matter of philosophy of government as to what belongs, even in some respects, what belongs at the state level versus what belongs to the local level. Well,
let's say maybe you could enumerate for me, both of you, what a state really at its most minimal level needs to provide for its residents and for the land or whatever. The state has some things that it needs to provide, and how would they get the money to do that?
Well, the same taxing authority that exists today, and but that's going through the state government. So, I mean, the tax structure would probably be different in our state, and we haven't gotten that far down the road to say how much significantly it would change versus where it is today. I'll just give you one example where I think we almost across the board feel like the right solution isn't in place, and that's education. We have George Bush at one point with No Child Left Behind. Now you have the Obama administration with Common Core saying that we need one solution, one set of standards, one standardized test to rule the entire nation. And we very much believe that not only should we not have a federal standard, if you will, on that, but we shouldn't even have a state standard. And those should be argued and discussed, and frankly, the free market kind of vie for some of those issues at the local school board level or at the county level.
Would you? Let me ask you both a question. Would you both have corporate taxes or not?
No, we would. Well, let me just say, this isn't up to me, right? I mean, but my vision would be, if it were up to me, I would say absolutely we would eliminate corporate tax, because corporate tax is just an expense to them that they pass on to the consumer, right? I mean,
well, they don't have to pass it on, and they don't have to have such obscene profits.
Well, that's questionable who has obscene and non-obscene profits.
Oh, I don't know. That's not much of a question in my mind, but go ahead.
Not everybody has obscene profits.
Well, how about, making billions of dollars every quarter and not paying your income tax?
Well, I'm not arguing with you that, but a lot of that's enabled through federal government legislation and tax loopholes and tax breaks, and because they continue to give money to these candidates to get reelected. So
anyhow, you would now Rick Perry is going all over the country like a traveling salesman. Sort of basically undermining other states, and other states are very angry at him about this, by the way. Everywhere he goes, he's not too popular with this. He's selling Texas as a place for two reasons why businesses should relocate there. One is that they will have little or practically no corporate taxes, and secondly, that there won't be any minimum wage, which means they can hire people for $5 or $2 a day, whatever the market will bear, so that businesses should rush over there. So, I want to ask Jeffrey, and Scott, you already told me about corporate taxes. Jeffrey, would you have any corporate taxes?
We haven't really had that discussion yet. I mean, obviously, there's got to be some sources of revenue to bring taxes in, and I don't know that we're far enough along in that discussion. I mean, we have some pretty screwed up tax situation in the state as it is right now, and it so much is embedded in the Constitution right now that it's difficult to be flexible on that.
So wait a minute. Are you giving me? Are you already a politician, Jeffrey? Are you giving me a political answer here?
No,
I asked you a yes or no question.
Well, it's not up to him.
I always said I don't know. It's not going to be up to me. It's going to be up to the people that ultimately have.
Okay, so what about Scott? I'll start with you and then Jeffrey. What about, will there be a minimum wage in your vision? Will there be a minimum wage?
I can't, and I wish I could answer that because it's really not a trivial question, right?
To say the least, it's not a trivial question. It's a very important. Yeah.
Well, why? But I mean, it gets into many, many deeper issues, especially with issues about the federal government debasing the currency and the debt and all the printing of money. And the reason why you hear this come up occasionally is because the value of the dollar has been debased so terribly that it costs more for people to live. And so people, the way that gets perpetuated into the discussion and into discourse is, well, we need to give people a higher minimum wage, right?
Well, wait. Can I stop you for a second? I understand all that. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a valuable discussion to have. And it's clearly, there's a lot of trouble with the federal government and the way it sets standards and the way it inflates money in the Federal Reserve. Let's say we're in this new state in Western Maryland, whatever it's called. It's called Western Maryland. Call it Western Maryland.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so we're in Western Maryland, and there are people that work there at low-level jobs, let's say maybe at a McDonald's or maybe, putting widgets together in a factory or something like that.
Sure.
And your state legislature or whatever the form of the government is votes to have no minimum wage so that people are there who will live there. And, this is what happens all over the country now, aside from arguing about, who sets this and what its value is. There are certain basic things that cost a certain basic amount of money no matter where you live, even rural areas, which are low cost compared to a place like New York where I live, which is ridiculous, like electricity or gasoline or a mortgage payment or, what a doctor costs or how much food costs. All of this is going up all the time. You can't really live in this country anywhere on less than $10 or $15 an hour, and even that's a joke. So I'm just asking you straight ahead, both of you, would there be a minimum wage?
So my answer is this, okay? I can't wave the magic wand, right?
Yeah, but you were talking earlier about if in your vision. That's what I'm asking you. In your vision.
In my vision, the market would set this. But here's the interesting. Let me finish this statement before we go on. Though, here's the thing. If you know, this debate came up around the fast food industry and McDonald's recently, right? And
for very good reasons.
Okay, but here, let me finish for a minute. You know who those people should be angry at? Not McDonald's. They should be angry at every other employer in the country. And you know why? Because if they had skills that were so marketable and needed by all those other companies, they would be bidding their wages up. Secondly, people get paid minimum wage as an entry level, right? They don't stay at minimum wage. You know what most employers, at least the ones I talk to that are small businesses here, tell me? The first thing they look when they hire someone without skills, let's say right out of high school, for instance, is they're dependable, they show up, and they can count on them. They don't have a problem training them. So maybe they do work at minimum wage for 6 months or 9 months or a year. But if these people prove that they're dependable, they get paid more money.
Yeah, they go from $8 to $10 after 3 years.
Even more than that. I mean, my brother-in-law is
Scott, nobody can live in this country. You've got to be honest. Nobody can live in this country and have a decent life for them and their kids on anything less than $15 or $20 an hour.
Okay, so how many, let's say, 40-year-olds do you know that are actually making minimum wage? What percentage of the population? Now, we're getting off track here, about what the purpose of this movement is, right? But the fact is, the people of our state are going to have to figure that out, right? We have to figure out what we want our state government to do.
So in other words, you're telling me there really is no guarantee one way or the other. The market will. So both of you probably feel that the market sets these things, right?
No. So let me finish. So if we start a new state, we are going to wipe the slate clean and question everything. We are not going to make any presumptions about premises. We are going to, if we're going to set up a new state, we might as well look at everything brand new. Should the state do it? Should it be a local thing? Or should we just get rid of it out of government altogether and let the private sector take care of it?
But before
we're going to look at all of those things.
But before, that's a good idea. But before people will go ahead and actually help you form it or agree to do it, they're going to ask you, inevitably, they're going to ask you questions like this, right?
Well, they generally ask questions like what the revenue base will be, what will be the tax base.
No, but inevitably people are going to ask you, like, for instance, businesses will ask you, in advance before they ever want to, before they'd even put money into, let's say, a campaign to form this state to help you out. If people want to invest in this, they'll want to know answers to the questions like this. If people, for instance, want to move from one place to another, and they may say, well, I want to move to Western Maryland. It sounds interesting. Or Northern Colorado. It sounds interesting. But I'd like to know if I'll be able to have a livable wage. I'd like to know, for instance, if abortion is legal. I'd like to know about what my gun rights are. People want to know in advance before you all can get your help, right?
Well,
Jeff, let's give Jeffrey a chance.
Sure.
Yeah. I would just all that will be well. The structure, the overall structure of the state, obviously has to be drafted into a state constitution. That has to happen before we go to Congress. So it's not that those discussions don't need to happen. I mean, frankly, in our state right now, we have 11 counties that may end up being 30 or 25 or 30 counties down the road. So for us to prejudge some of those decisions and kind of force that decision on other people that may be considering it at this point is really premature.
So it's entirely up to the new legislatures and to the citizens of each new state, right?
Well, there's going to be some structure to that as relates to what's in the Constitution. So there's going to be some certainty as to that, but yeah, and then we'll have to have an initial set of statutes as well. So.
Well, let me ask you both this question. I'm sorry. The reason I hurry sometimes is that time goes so fast and we never have enough time. I mean, it flies when you're talking about stuff like this. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States, how do you both see those first 10 amendments? You think they're both pretty good ideas?
In what context by how do we see them? What do you mean by that?
Well, there's the First Amendment that, let's say, Congress should, not
establish a religion.
Right, and then also that guarantee of free speech. The Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Third Amendment, Fourth Amendment, right to privacy. All that stuff. How do you think about those 10 amendments? Would they fit neatly into your state constitutions?
Jeff, you want to go or you want me to answer that?
I would say, yeah. I mean, that is the basis for starting is where we are respecting those the initial Bill of Rights. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would just say this. I mean, I'm a big proponent of people's rights. Okay, I mean, I will say that's what I fight for quite a bit. Everybody's rights, not just my own, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, freedom of the speech, freedom of the press, freedom to protect yourselves, a similar Second Amendment, due process of law, critical, trial by jury, critical. I mean, those things would be built directly into our state constitution, into our Declaration of Rights. So. Many states have very similar provisions as the United States Bill of Rights does, right?
Right, they do.
And, I'm a big proponent. You talked about the NSA spying, the unlimited detention under NDAA, the illegal parts of the Patriot Act. I am opposed to all that stuff, all of it, right? And I want protection from that. I certainly don't want my state doing it, and I really don't want my federal or national government doing it.
Right. So when it comes to the court systems, you already have established state courts. It would just sort of transfer over. Is that how it would work?
I mean, I would see it that way, right? I think the only question that comes up are cases that are in process. And if you read some of the enabling acts, when new states have been admitted into the union, they address some of that about, okay, it'll follow the old law until the case is done, or whatever that may be. So. Yeah, I mean, that would just transfer over. I don't see any difference there.
And as far as, let's say, if the Supreme Court of the United States, if in Western Maryland or Northern Colorado, the new states, if there was a case that went up and then finally it wound up in the federal courts and went up in the Supreme Court, your new states, your enforcement agencies and everything else in your courts would abide by a Supreme Court decision?
Scott, I'll let you take that one.
So let me ask you this before I answer that. Mike, where are you on the issue of nullification? Colorado nullified the marijuana laws, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you believe that states have the power to nullify laws that are unjust and immoral and unconstitutional?
That is a question for another whole hour's discussion.
I would love to. Hey, I'll get you in touch with Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center if you want to have him on. He'd love to talk to you, man. He's a good friend. I know him well. So,
all right. So listen, we're going to have to wind up. So Jeffrey, why don't you make a final statement, and you can tell people again the name of the website and why this should happen, and generally speaking, across the nation, why people should do this.
certainly. Yeah. Well, our website is 51ststate.org, so number 51ststate.org. I think we all agree. We go back to this inalienable right within the Declaration of Independence. It is a right. It is the right of the people to alter or abolish government when it no longer respects and reflects the values of people within the community. This is not revolutionary. This is what we call restorationary. We're just trying to restore government back to the people where it belongs, as opposed to an overly dominant federal legislature and a very dominant one-size-fits-all state legislature or government structure. So I think this is a very healthy discussion. If you go back to, as Scott talked earlier on, the size of the country when it was founded versus where we are right now, having more political subdivisions, more diversity, more opportunities, more competition, if you will, between the states is a good thing. It should be embraced regardless of what side of this political spectrum you come from.
All right, Scott.
Yeah, so my opinions are very similar. First, I will say to people, walk away with this idea or this question and answer, what is government? And we answer that question by saying government is nothing more or nothing less than the people exercising their right of association to form a political society. And a state is a political society. We no longer wish to be in the political society known as Maryland. We wish to create our own. And what Jeffrey said is correct. I mean, in the Declaration it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
And now that's something that we can all agree on every side is not happening.
I agree with you. I don't think it's working for anybody, to tell you the truth. And I would just say, this is really about our right of self-determination. If the state of Maryland refuses to let us go, how is that? To me, that is political slavery. They are oppressing and abusing us. We have taxation without representation, and if they force us to stay against our will, that is, in my opinion, political slavery.
Well, what if they do force you to stay against your will? Then what?
Well, then I will feel much better about my decision to leave this state. Okay, but I know this.
Where are you going to go? Colorado?
I don't know. You know what? It's not an easy answer.
All right,
right? But let me just tell you, Mike. Real quick.
I have to stop soon because we've got to do a commercial break.
Sure. No, I was going to say, I've done stuff with the Tea Party and the Occupy movements. I've went to Occupy meetings. I've met with their leadership in Maryland. I think there's a number of areas where the Tea Party and the Occupy movement agree on. Some of their tactics, I think, they don't agree on, But I think there's a number of areas like, the NSA, the NDAA, the Patriot Act, this corporate cronyism and protectionism of all these big companies.
Yeah, what about income inequality? That's the main thing Occupy's upset about.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you really define that.
I'll define it for you. The head of McDonald's makes $13.8 million a year. And somebody who works for McDonald's for 5 years and is a good worker gets $10 an hour. How's that?
So let me just say, first off, people who want to start their own businesses and risk and invest their own money and risk, right, they should get rewards for that. That's entrepreneurship. But where I have a problem is when you have the government stepping in and picking winners and losers in these industries. Us bailing out Wall Street was ridiculous.
Oh, right? You know what? I'm with you on this. I'm completely with you on this. I don't think the government should get involved in the question I just asked. I think people should boycott McDonald's until they lower that guy's salary and raise the other people's.
That may be the way to go. But here's the thing. We are diverse people. And I don't mean diverse by things we can't control like skin pigmentation and eye color and hair color. We're diverse because we have diverse needs, wants, interests, talents, and those outcomes are going to be diverse. Some people are more ambitious, and some people are more inventive, and some people are more creative, and some people are smarter than other people, and so forth. The outcomes are always going to be different. To make them identical would be an injustice to people.
Okay, so I have to flip right over to a commercial break. Give me the website for your thing.
It's freewesternmd.org.
Freewesternmd.org, yeah.
And then on Facebook, it's facebook.com/freewesternmaryland.
Okay, Jeffrey, Hare, and Scott Strelczyk, I really appreciate you coming on, and more to be discussed some later time.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, guys. All right, let's go to a break, and then we'll be back for a few closing comments for this hour. Next hour, we're going to talk to a guy who's written a book, the book on the history of civil disobedience in the United States. Fascinating book. Okay, what we're going to do the next hour is we're going to interview a man named Louis Perry, who is a professor of American history at St. Louis University. He's written a new book, which is just out. It is a complete history and a terrifically written book, and it's called Civil Disobedience an American tradition. It's a history of civil disobedience from every direction on every issue, women's suffrage, abolition, voting, anti-war, every major issue of life and death and serious political issue in this country going all the way back to its founding and before that. He discusses this, the people involved in it, the philosophical issues involved, but most particularly how people protested. How did people protest what was the law of the land, the law of the state? How did they go about doing it? What were the differing philosophies that infused it, religious and secular? People argued about whether there should be violence or not. What was civil disobedience? What was in civil disobedience? How did the authorities react in every case? It's an incredible book. This is a book everybody should get if they want to understand the history of the country and how to change the country when the laws are in place that don't reflect our own needs. Okay.
Power to the people. 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 Power to the people.
Now, every week on this program, we have almost inevitable discussions about ways in which, of course, we can alter or correct or fix, or whatever word you want to use, our government, our society, our culture. And specifically, when we're talking about the political process, having come of age in the 60s, I make a big issue constantly about civil disobedience, having been involved in a lot of it in the 60s with civil rights and voting issues and anti-war issues. And it's something I'm fascinated by and gut interested in. It is a long-standing, important American tradition. And not obviously just an American tradition, but we have somebody on tonight who has written a new book called Civil Disobedience, an American Tradition, and that is Professor Louis Perry, who is you're currently emeritus at St. Louis University?
That's right.
Okay, but you do teach classes?
I'm actually not teaching right now. I go in for meetings and have an office and are associated with the history department, but I'm retired from that.
So it was history, but also you have interests in religion and theater and generally.
American studies was another field that I was in as much as history and American cultural history, but the theater was long ago. I went through a period after being an English major as an undergraduate where I thought I went into a graduate school in theater, drama and theater, and partly for the kind of reasons you were just talking about, all the things that were going on around me in 1960, 61. It isn't that I lost interest in the theater, but I lost interest in a career of that kind, and certainly of teaching drama. And so I got a degree in industrial and labor relations, and then I thought, well, I can do what I want to do in history, and I was very lucky to get some very fine teachers in history. And I went to a school where at that time it was not impossible to switch from one field to another, or at least if you could talk your way into it.
Well, in those days you could do it more easily too. What school was that?
Cornell.
Oh, okay.
The procedure then was you went and introduced yourself to someone.
Right.
And obviously you had to do well then in courses, but so I switched a couple of times, But basically
history and American studies, right?
Yeah.
So a couple of books that Professor Perry has written are Boats Against the Current, American Culture Between Revolution and Modernity, 1820 to 1860, Intellectual Life in America, A History. But the new book is called Civil Disobedience, an American Tradition, which you must have been working on for many, many years, right?
I have been working on it for a long time, almost embarrassingly long.
It's so deep and it's so wide.
I could just do, and then it turned out to be a much longer and bigger history and a big project. And then I got to the point where I really wanted to do it well. So it has been a long time.
And I can tell when I'm reading it. It's one of those books where, and I'm sure you saw it when you were reading it, and after you look back on it, as deep and wide as it is, as a survey of the history of civil disobedience in America, there was probably each one of the chapters could have turned into a book by itself, right?
I think that's right. And also towards the end of writing it, and I and when I was working more with the publisher, I set up a folder, and I would seem to find something almost every day in the newspaper or in conversation or something I was reading, and I gave the folder a title, something like "Add to the Book?" And and I don't think much of it got added to the book. Maybe a little bit about a few references at the end to the Occupy movement, which did seem to me a significant new development.
Well, unless you want to be like Robert Caro and in Volume 5 about Lyndon Johnson. But
yeah, but since then, since now, I really can't do anything with the book. I still have a folder, and I keep, and with it, it just says more on civil disobedience or something like that. I guess it's just a habit, but I find something. I've said for a long time to my friends. Sometimes they would say, "Well, can you have a whole book on that?" I would say, "I find something in the newspaper, and read a lot every day."
That's right.
Every day, and some of it is important, and if I hadn't finished the book, I'd be scrambling trying to adjust it and add chapters. And
well, so in the end, you do finally have to finish your things. I've been in the same position myself, but I'm glad you did finish it and publish it, because I think this is a book that if I were the head of a history department in a college, maybe even in a high school in an honors course, I would assign everybody to read, because. Well, let's just try to. There's so much in the book. Obviously, we're not going to cover all of it in the time we have, but I wanted to try to go through some of the high points as I see them, and maybe as you've delineated them in the book. First of all, you call it civil disobedience, an American tradition. How do you mean an American tradition?
Well, actually, that's a phrase which I credit to and got from Hannah Arendt.
Hannah Arendt,
Hannah Arendt, the philosopher, and she, who was not American by her first part of her career, but who related it to a tradition of voluntary groups and citizen groups in American history. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I have quoted her or said in my own way that it's an American tradition, and I see my colleagues or friends who are in European history raising their eyebrows, and they want to object to that. I'm not saying there aren't traditions in other places, but there is a distinctive American history, which I hope I've shown, if not proven.
But you don't mean to say that it's an American tradition that Americans invented civil disobedience. Are you saying that?
Well, I'm not saying that they invented it in the sense that nothing like it had happened ever before, but they always feel like they've invented it. They're usually trying to solve a problem in their own city or in the government, mm-hmm. in the United States, and they invented in American terms within American religious traditions, and for the most part, or within and against the Constitution, mm-hmm. or the Constitution. It's as a solution to their problem in American life, and often with people saying that what you're doing is not American and it's unconstitutional and it's not
to break a law is unconstitutional.
It requires justification
mm-hmm.
most of the time. There are periods when there's so much that it maybe doesn't seem like it requires so much justification. But there's a long history of trying to explain and justify in American terms, and that, I think that's pretty clear. The one period where that, for me, gets more interesting but also more problematic is in the 1930s. The adoption and explanation of Gandhi to Americans in a couple
right.
of very important books,
right.
and then there's clearly a kind of influence from abroad, and there were a number of people who went to India and other people that were influenced by him, but they certainly had to adjust it to.
But until Gandhi, until the integration of, or let's say the wandering over to America of Gandhi, and the cross-fertilization, as you point out in your book, that people who were Americans or who wrote textbooks, not textbook, but who wrote sort of guides to civil disobedience, spent some time with Gandhi and certainly studying Gandhi and then brought it back. But let me ask you this question. Do you have to, I guess you have to live in some form of a democracy to have civil disobedience. Obviously, you don't have civil disobedience in Tsarist Russia or pre-revolutionary France, right?
I think that's true in those periods. But there is a field now. I don't know that there are any American departments of it, but there is a field with people call it civil resistance, and people who are studying civil resistance in comparative terms. Mm-hmm. And they are talking about Myanmar, and they are talking about Egypt and Timothy Garton Ash is the scholar, I think, at Oxford, who is very involved with this, and he writes often for the New York Review of Books. So this field is becoming better and better thought out in America too. It's a kind of comparative field on ways of approaching and changing autocratic societies that are not simply revolution and with guns, so they may not be totally separate from that, but that's not the whole thing. And so it is an interesting comparative field now. And I would say that I don't know how many countries that they now are studying, but they have a wide range of people studying a lot of the world today. And it is all this since they date it really from Gandhi and the United States in the 30s onto the present. It's a book. I think there's a book called Civil Resistance that Ash edited, but there are a lot of scholars that are working in this field.
So basically what it does is since the world is so much more internationally knit, sort of like a fabric than it ever was before, that everything sort of cross-fertilizes almost instantaneously, individual traditions, or specifically American tradition, could be brought over to other places, and then we could have influences from Gandhi, and then it could in turn be influencing ours, and then we could bring that over there. But let me ask you this question. Now, you refer to this just at one point in your book about the Declaration of Independence, and you say,
Can I go back on one point?
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just was going to mention that in terms of what we were just talking about, that in the book, I talk about the comic book that SCLC created for Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story, and which was
there was an illustrated comic.
It was very influential at the time, and people like Congressman John Lewis say it was very influential when he read it. Mm-hmm. And but in that folder that I said I had developed about things I could possibly add to the book, one of the things that came up after the book was really done was that in Egypt, the Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story translated into the relevant languages was playing a role there, and played a role in what you remember. At first, it seemed like a very optimistic change, the revolution in Egypt, but maybe not now. And I think that comic book has been changed elsewhere. And then I saw John Lewis the other day on the Colbert Show, and he has produced another comic book. And I think he said something like he's going to produce a line of 50 comic books. So anyway, the influence does go both ways.
And well, of course, then that's a publishing phenomenon, because graphic novels now are something that's spread all over the world, and they are sort of a universal language. Just add the words. But here, something you mentioned just at one point in your book, because often civil disobedience, that's with a TS, people who have, civilly been disobedient, they refer to the Declaration of Independence often. And the Declaration of Independence seems to be saying that everybody should have a right to petition for grievances, which it says in there, and that when oppression, I'm just obviously paraphrasing, is unrelenting and doesn't compromise at all, and doesn't even recognize the legitimacy of the protests, then a change has to be made. Then the question becomes, how do you affect this change? Yeah. So if a lot of civil rights groups over decades, or maybe, 100 or 200 years, have said in this country, our country was born in protest, so we have the right to protest too, and break all the laws that originally were put in place, let's say by England, we broke them all, or, we cut off our relationship to the governing authority.
Right.
we all have an inheritance, do we not, as Americans, to do this?
In a sense, yes, but it had to be achieved. It had to be defined, and you can always find possible meanings in the Declaration of Independence that aren't
true
so clear in the Constitution, especially before the Bill of Rights. But even then, in the Constitutional Convention, there was very little discussion, and nothing, in fact, I think that contemplated a legitimate practice of civil disobedience in America, and there really wasn't. There was a lot of disorder and a lot of Republican ferment, and in the old sense of Republican, and a lot of disorder, but not so much civil disobedience, and it certainly wasn't treated legally in the way that it would be later on.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's really, and one of the strongest statements against anything like citizens breaking laws was from Andrew Jackson, who was rightly thought of as representing a new democratic, more democratic viewpoint. But he too thought, in this country, after all, people get to vote. Well, not everyone did, but that's the way he puts it.
Mm-hmm.
So they have no right to protest against the acts of government.
Well, of course,
so
there
it
were.
had to be achieved. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Well, obviously, there were immense numbers of people in this country who didn't have the right to vote. But the original protests, I guess, in this country go back before the revolution. We're talking about certain religious groups
that especially, yes,
that were oppressed by the state or local religions and had to relocate, or protested certainly by not wanting to pay taxes. I mean, then you even get this tax refusal is a major thing you address in your book, right?
Well, religion is the source of some of the impulses that lead towards civil disobedience in the colonial period, and over taxation. Over military service.
Mm-hmm.
That is, there were Quakers in a number of colonies who refused to conform to compulsory military exercises,
mm-hmm.
and so there are some beginnings of a tradition, I suppose, in the colonial period, and. But it takes a while to I think it would be wrong. It might be nice, but it would be wrong to believe that there's a kind of continuous route leading from the colonial period into American national history that
well, I mean, those
allows much room for civil disobedience. But citizen discontent and disorder was plentiful.
Mm-hmm. The issue with Jackson was, which probably nobody knows now because hardly anybody ever studies history in America.
Well, I hope
but it's
true.
Sadly true, yeah. But the big issue, and I think hardly anybody knows about this anymore, is a gigantic problem in the country with removal of the Cherokee Indians from the east to the western part of the United States, right?
That's yeah, and that's what I argue. That is really the beginning of what becomes a tradition of civil disobedience in America. That's the first episode that really allows that description. Partly because
what did he want to do, and what did happen, and who were the people who protested this?
He did want to see the Indians that really owned their own lands. They were like nations within nations in the southeastern states, which was his part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
He did want to see them removed, and lots of other people did too. In the meanwhile, there were missionaries sent by the American Board of Commissioners to foreign missions because they were foreign countries. They were counted as foreign countries.
The reservations.
The nations of the Cherokees and the Choctaws and the others, the Seminoles and the others. And Jackson wanted them removed. And when he became elected, his party thought that was part of their mandate. that white farmers and planters and their slaves could have that land. The Indians also had slaves, so that's not the issue. But so the government wanted to and passed legislation and did remove the Indians, and it did in Georgia. It took a particular. It became particularly full of conflict because some of the missionaries there refused to move. Georgia passed laws that tried to force the Indians out, limiting the things that they could do on their land, and then also limiting any individuals that abetted the Indians, that aided the Indians, and that turns out to be, it seems to me, the first of a very familiar, what becomes later a very familiar kind of civil disobedience, one that goes all the way to the Supreme Court with very complicated alliances.
It also, in a way, it's also the beginning, and on a larger scale, nationally in the United States, of one of the essential roots or the themes that flow through your book,
right,
which is people referring to a higher law, right, than just human or government law on Earth, and to certain moral and philosophical appeals and larger desires and goals than human beings can actually have the right, according to these people who disobey, to inflict on other people. There is a higher cause. This runs throughout all, or most, I should say, before the country got completely secular almost. It runs through almost all these things, women's suffrage and temperance and everything abolition, everything you refer to in the book. There's a religious component, and that is, and Martin Luther King, after all, the religious people involved said there is a higher law, a higher kind of justice and equality than this state law or that federal law, right?
And that can mean a lot of different things.
Right.
I wanted to be clear that the several of the missionaries, two in the end, actually went to jail and stayed in jail for a long time, which makes it more like some of the other kinds of civil disobedience in American history. And they as I said, they stayed until the court essentially found that that they shouldn't be in jail, but Georgia still kept them in jail, and so it became a big cause, and people organized around it, including some women who felt they were really going against the tide by anonymously, but writing petitions and then getting signatures to support the Cherokees. So it was an interesting episode of civil disobedience, and I do think it's formative of the tradition, though not the only basis for the tradition.
Well, there is this theme. Well, we're going to move it along in history a little bit. I said, but after that, or during that, and then after that, parallel to Britain with abolition, the abolitionists certainly, and here's the beginning of another one of the great sort of themes or areas of conflict that runs through all of your book in the history of American civil disobedience is civil disobedience versus uncivil or aggressive disobedience, right?
Right.
I mean, with abolition, after all, people tried and tried and tried and then wound up with John Brown and the Civil War.
No, that's right. I try in the book very much to, from the beginning, count the slaves themselves as sources of civil disobedience also. I mean, every slave who escaped from slavery was breaking the law, and many of them were breaking the law repeatedly. And some of them wrote books in which they dramatized opposition to the law. And then they do become. I don't think they've ever been given as much credit, but in the North, the black people who lived there and the slaves who had escaped and moved up there did become very formative, I think, in the civil disobedience tradition. It's separate from what was happening with the Cherokees and the missionaries, though it does come together. It does come together in the partly among some of the women who had been active in petitioning for the Cherokees also become very, very important in civil disobedience anti-slavery and civil disobedience in the northern states.
Well, it's always interesting to me that first you have people who are religious and or even actually ministers, and then you have women as a constant participant in all these things, and certainly women too, because they were denied their rights. But there was a big turning point right before the Civil War when the Supreme Court decided that the fugitive slave law was okay. So that if anybody could come up from down south and assert their rights without even hardly any proof. And the law said that local citizens in non-slave areas, in non-slave states, had to automatically turn over somebody that they said was their property, and they could call on local authorities to do this. And this is almost like a breaking point where civil disobedience didn't seem to work anymore, right?
Well, but there were new kinds of civil disobedience too. Then, but it was a strain. It was a strain on the more what you were calling before the more civil kind of.
In the sense of the word civil. Yeah.
But I would say for much of American history, and including when I was giving credit to the escaping slaves as civil disobedience, there's law breaking and not always any constraints of politeness involved there. But the period after the fugitive slave law is a high period for lots of kinds of opposition to slavery, but certainly for civil disobedience too.
Well, civil disobedience is a continuum. Then it's everything from speaking out loud at a meeting, right, to signing a petition, to actually forming an underground railway to spirit slaves away, right?
That's right. The defining features of civil disobedience would include a kind of civility in some ways, and behaving nonviolently and accepting punishment. But that's always, I think, throughout this story that I try to tell, that's always an area where there's potential disagreement and actual disagreement.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes the tradition perhaps so lively and continuous. That it's not like a religious movement with a very fixed statement of 7 articles of faith, and if you can't reinterpret them, you've got to stick to them.
Mm-hmm.
There is a kind of flexibility in that dynamic, I think.
Well, this whole issue of, which fascinates me throughout all of this in this book that you've written, and by the way, the book is called Civil Disobedience in American Tradition, published by Yale University Press. Is it actually out now? Is it available?
Oh, it's out. It's actually, the way it works now, it's been out for a while, but I think it's officially released either today or yesterday. It's right about now.
Okay.
So, but it's in bookstores, and it's on Amazon and the other Barnes and Noble and all the others now. Yes.
Well, what absolutely fascinates me throughout all of this, and it's one of the endless arguments, and probably always will go on, is, and you talk about this so often in your book, is the tension between people who say that if you're going to violate or disobey a completely immoral or unjust law, then you shouldn't be punished. And other people who insist, like Martin Luther King, that there's no power in your disobedience if you don't show that you will accept whatever they can dish out. This is a big thing, right?
It is a big subject of the tradition and of the book.
And it's Gandhi too,
But
well, for instance, Martin Luther King.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King certainly.
He insisted on that.
He certainly, at least in the letter from the Birmingham jail, I thought that may be the most familiar document for most people from the civil disobedience tradition. He based on a lot of Christian theology as well as immediate politics in Birmingham and where he was.
Mm-hmm.
But he did make the case for serving your time, or at least making that accepting that position in jail, which can be a very powerful position, which can be a very strong base on which to demonstrate criticism. But then other people, that issue gets complicated because it's so easy for one person involved in a movement to criticize another one because they didn't go to the jail soon enough or for a long enough time.
Mm-hmm.
Or, there was a lot of carping at King about not getting arrested other times, and
well, there was some carping from other people that said he shouldn't have been arrested at all, and he shouldn't have even served time. I mean, Malcolm X wouldn't have served time if he could help it.
That's right. I think that's right. But it is. I define civil disobedience as including a commitment to accept punishment. But I, in the next sentence, want to say that there's a lot of disagreement too about that, and that's what makes the tradition exciting, and even in recent times, even in very polite northern campus episodes where people sit in the president's office and things like that, or fairly recent times. Some do serve their time, which is usually not a lot, and get complimented for it because they're in the real spirit of civil disobedience, and others go to any lengths they can in order to fight that, and it seems to me that's part of the dynamic.
Well, it seems to me that accepting punishment also extends to the fact that when Martin Luther King and other people throughout history, and the women's suffrage and abolition, and even later on with Occupy, after it was obvious that the police weren't playing the game right anymore, the people accepted beatings, dogs attacking them, fire hoses, beatings, even so far as the people losing their lives by being beaten and shot at. I mean, Gandhi was very big with this, right? Gandhi himself said, and you mentioned this in the book, of course, that he hated what he called cowards.
Yes.
He said, if you can't sit there and take it and not fight back, then fight or run away, But to him, the ultimate bravery was to take the punishment to show these people that you were morally superior, and maybe also to show the world.
Yes, that's right. And the international newspaper coverage of Gandhi was, I believe, had a very powerful role in creating new versions of civil disobedient action from the 1930s on.
But do you have like a since the book is so it's an overview, and you attempt to be as objective as possible, but were you ever you're maybe roughly a few years older than me? I don't know. I'm 68.
I'm 74.
Okay, so there we are. So there you are in the 60s, maybe a little older than the average 60s disobedient, but.
Yeah, I think that's right. Both my brother and sister were civil disobedience, at least on one occasion, and I do dedicate the book to them, and I never was. And people say, why not? I can honestly say there were times when I thought there might be some consequence. The police might come to a church where a draft resistor was holed up. But it just never happened, and I certainly didn't go out seeking it. I don't think I have to explain why it never happened.
No, you don't have to explain it.
But also I wasn't ever involved in. Sometimes there were events that faculty members that I knew got involved in, and sitting in an office and so on. And then afterwards, the next step was forming a defense committee to raise funds, to hire a lawyer to keep them from going to jail. So that I missed that part of the the contradiction too. And in both cases, it's not calculated. Just the way it worked out. As I told you, I switched fields a couple of times after graduating. And by the time there was a lot of civil disobedient action, I was just trying to catch up with history, a new field I'd chosen with very little background, and couldn't just take off. A lot of my friends took off for the Freedom Ride, and I if I have any regret about anything in my life, it's that I didn't do that. But I really couldn't have done it at that time.
I think there's a lot of people. Let's say, let's use a rough age span from, let's say, the early '60s. People who are in their early '60s now, all the way up until, let's say, their mid to late '70s. There's a lot of people, including myself, by the way, and I was out there. I wasn't so civil. When I was doing the anti-war demonstration, certainly when I was involved with civil rights, trying to register voters in places,
right.
I didn't go down south. So there's this whole line, a continuum, where people feel certain regrets that they didn't fight as hard as they should have, or put themselves in places where they should. I think everybody has that, and everybody places themselves certainly along the line. I mean, I had many places where I got hit by police batons, but I never did get actually sent to jail, and I didn't serve time in jail. And then there's this odd kind of thing in the world of civil disobedience, where some people have sort of more credit, so to speak, because they did serve longer or got beat up better. It was worse.
Right.
And people say, well, where were you during that? But back to the book here.
Right. No, I don't get involved. I mean, I really don't get involved.
There's no need to with a history like this.
There was a period when I was in graduate school when I didn't do some things because I really needed to make my way in the field that I had switched into, and a lot of my friends didn't, and a lot of them never got degrees and never. There was a lot of turbulence then. So I want to ask you about something else, though. What impressed me so much in this book, obviously, when you read about, and you mention all the incidents, and you talk about Martin Luther King, and so anybody who's reading this book will get to read about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and find out things that they probably never knew before. For instance, that Rosa Parks didn't just decide that day to do something that she had never done before. She was already a veteran civil rights participant, right? That's right.
Can you give a little background on
that's right. And there was a tension, of course, in the civil rights movement over the role of already seasoned civil rights conscious black women. And then the ministers who set up SCLC and tried to organize and in some views control the development of the civil rights movement. From that. I forget what the question about bringing her up.
Well, but the thing is that people have backgrounds. In other words, and that's a point you make throughout the book, is people didn't just suddenly show up and do something on impulse. A lot of these people that we look back on from the 50s who were doing all this incredibly brave stuff were people who had decades, in some cases, experience going all the way back to the 30s and 40s with this.
That's very important, and the forgotten part of that, it's not totally forgotten, but the forgotten part of that progression is the late 1930s and the 1940s, and I think that even people who think they are very familiar with the civil rights tradition, they know Rosa Parks, but the role of the young people who were active before World War II, had read Gandhi, had read the books about Gandhi. I'm thinking of Pauli Murray. With one of the women, or Bayard Rustin is better known because he just stayed with it for so long. But the first march on Washington movement is extremely important. I think in my book, and I hope in my book it comes off that way. Well,
that's involving A. Philip Randolph, right? A.
Philip Randolph, but a whole lot of young people in the 30s, some of whom were living in ashrams and. We're determined to change things. Well, then it's very hard. World War II didn't exactly advance that.
Right.
But I think that generation is extremely important, and I get I expressed some of my feelings very quickly at one point about the greatest generation, but nobody talks about the peace heroes of the greatest generation. Mm-hmm. I'm not disparaging at all. I have my uncles who were. Soldiers but
it's so important.
There is a way that the 30s and the 40s got forgotten, and Rosa Parks' experience, Pauli Murray's, a lot of people And even Rustin, people know more about him later on than his earlier experience. St. Louis had a good deal of civil rights activity in that period.
Another part of the book that I found so dramatic, I mean, the way you write about it is very good, too. It's just very dramatic. And, also, I think one of the things that the power that comes from your book, in a way, is that you don't dramatize, you report on the drama, which makes a difference, Like, you're reporting on... When you talked about what the people went through for women's suffrage and how women got beaten and how they went into polling places and forced their way over to a place and actually deposited a ballot in a box.
Okay, good. Yes.
It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary, and it's something most people in this country don't have any idea about.
Well, it is the civil disobedience in American history is the subject of a lot of dramatic and interesting stories. There's stories aren't the whole of history, but stories make it interesting and readable and memorable too. So I did try to recount a lot of what had happened, and
it's so inspiring and impressive to read about these two main areas, which is the women's suffrage and civil disobedience, especially where women are saying very clearly, why should we pay attention to a law when we can't vote for the people who make the laws? It's so clear now, but back then I guess it wasn't to everybody, right?
Well, yes, that's true. And it had lots of connections to anti-slavery. I mean, when Susan B. Anthony was before the judge for illegally voting, it's so interesting to think about that as
illegally voting.
Right. Of course, we wouldn't be able to do that very easily today because at least the places where I've lived, you get a voting machine, but you don't. But illegally voting, she said, "Well, I'm just doing what everyone with any conscience did during the fugitive slave crises, and, when someone was trying to escape north to freedom." So there are a lot of connections that they draw like that.
Well, as you point out too, after the Civil War and the amendments giving all the people that these women had been working for to, help from slavery or to escape from slavery and working for their rights, suddenly they are, at least in the Constitution, guaranteed rights that now they don't even have, which finally set the final fire under them,
Now, these are all very important parts of the subject, and
I think you also, another thing you bring it up to the present time, and you do mention the anti-abortion organizations and their protests, and obviously, there's a lot of discussion about nonviolence and violence, and how far do you go, and what's civil and what's not civil, and how do you achieve your aims. But you do bring up the modern issues. That subject is part of this history. If you are writing about civil disobedience and a tradition in America, and looking at that period from the 60s on, the anti-abortion movement is a big part of the story, and some of the people who were most important as leaders in that movement did have a history of supporting civil rights and thought they were doing the same thing, and anti-war activity,
and anti-war in some cases too. But they thought they were doing the same thing. There are others that where the connection seems much more dubious, but it is another application of civil disobedience, and there are debates that go on within the anti-abortion movements that are very similar to some of the debates in about civil rights and war, and what are the limits on dissent, and is extremism ever good? That even got echoed in some of the presidential campaign, in one of the presidential campaigns, but it is part of the story. It's
interesting. It's interesting. There's always this religious continuity. I mean, after all, if people, if people are opposed for religious reasons to taking life, and they were in the anti-war movement, like the Berrigans, for instance,
Right.
then they are almost, in some ways, you could argue they were duty bound from their point of view to oppose abortions.
Yes, they did feel that way, and some of the Supreme Court decisions they were reacting to did go into the question of what is life and when does life begin in a way that isn't actually parallel, I think, to anything in the women's movement or the previously or the anti-slavery movement, but it has some similarities.
If you, by the way, again, let me mention the book. It's the author is Lewis Perry, who I'm speaking to, and the book is Civil Disobedience: An American Tradition, which I am urging absolutely everybody who's listening to get for all sorts of reasons. We, of course, never get to mention so much because the book is so big and covers so much. But one of the major influences also on civil disobedience in this country, at least to take an intellectual or philosophical point of view, is Thoreau, right?
Yes, he is a recurrent figure in the book and in the tradition, though not really until fairly recent times. He is. I talk about him a lot, but it's really long after he's dead that he becomes prominent and influential.
Well, I remember his book he got much more popular in the 50s and 60s than he ever was, anywhere up until then.
But also controversial. I mean,
right.
There were critics of some parts of civil disobedience in the 60s who didn't want anything to do with Thoreau. Some because they didn't think he was practical enough. If you were active and supportive of the McCarthy campaign and wanted to do things that were politically effective, Thoreau didn't seem like a very good, at least to some people, like a very good figure to study and to imitate. Others disagreed. And if you thought there were other people that felt that there were lots of problems in America, and it was fine that there was so much protest, but that some of it was threatening to destroy law, the whole legal basis of society. And Thoreau then seemed like a very dangerous figure in American history.
After spending one night in jail.
And that's right. And with one night that very few people really knew very much about at the time. It is interesting how important his book became much later, and then the misreadings of it that support that. I do point out at one point that the one thing everybody knows about Thoreau is that he and Emerson had this conversation.
It was did that
and
really
never took place?
I was kidding. It didn't.
And anyone that read Thoreau's account of his time in jail would know that he gives almost a minute by maybe not, because he gives a very detailed account of his night in jail. If Emerson had come marching in, he would have written that down.
Well, what you're referring to is, and I've quoted this many times in my life, but I find that it's apocryphal, but which won't stop me from using it. But theoretically, he's in jail, and Emerson comes and says, "What are you doing in there, Henry?" And he says, "Well, what are you doing out there?"
That's right.
Ralph, what are you doing out there?
Everybody knows that.
But it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. But still, I remember hearing about it in the 60s after some event that I was encouraged by and that other people were criticizing. And I think I say that I don't remember who I read, but I think it was Murray Kempton I read who cited that quotation, and how terrific I thought it was to the point, except that it wasn't real.
That's one of the downsides of actually being a historian, But all right, listen, we've got to stop because I've got a commercial break that I've got to go to. This wonderful book is called Civil Disobedience: An American Tradition, and not only does it recount all the incidents and all the people involved, but it goes deeper than that and talks about all the different tensions and different arguments, philosophical and moral, that were constant and still are around in this to this very minute when people argue about what to do about government and society. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this very much, and I've enjoyed talking with you very much. And I hope a lot of readers are thinking more about their civil disobedience and and obedience.
Well, I'm quite happy that you wrote this book, and I think it should be assigned as basic reading in every college freshman class. And now I've got to go sell something. So
okay, thank you very, very much.
Okay, you too.
Bye-bye.
Let us go to a break now. And unless I want to have a sit-down strike and cross my arms and refuse to do a commercial, what do you think? See, I'm not going to do the commercial, and the engineer's not going to play it, and so we'll get fired. So we're hoping for a legal defense fund. Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Progress 127. Clearly, Professor Perry there wasn't as articulate as I keep claiming the book was. I mean, he was having a little trouble talking, but I think that's because he's a scholar. And a lot of scholars who write these astounding books in history that we should all know, and he writes very well, by the way, sometimes just aren't natural-born talkers, although he lectured a lot. But, you know, you get professors in school, or you get people who are really experts at certain things. They're better at actually thinking and writing than they are at talking. But so I guess I'm saying this because I don't want anybody to think that the book is in any way slow or rambly the way he presented himself. It's just a very solid, well-written, incredibly exciting and valuable book. So I recommend everybody get it, especially since I'm talking about civil disobedience all the time, talk about Occupy, anybody who's involved in anything. For anti-fracking, anti-war, any kind of civil disobedience on any subject, no matter what it is, would do well to read this book and to look at it. And anybody who's just interested in being an American or American history. All right, we're going to go to a little song and dance here, and we'll be back after the 7 o'clock news to talk about assisted suicide, a specific case that's happening in Pennsylvania right now, and the general issue of whether it's moral or legal or not, assisted suicide.
They paved paradise and put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hot spot. Don't it all?
And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Progress 127. If you've never heard this program before, we're here every Saturday evening from 5 to 8 p.m. East and 2 to 5 West. If you want to get in touch with me about any issue, to agree or disagree, you can go to my website, where you will also find out how to get on my mailing list, and you can contact me there, as I mentioned, and find out about books I've written. I have a recent book out, and other radio work that I do, and various and sundry other things. It's called FederFiles.com, FederFiles.com, and I welcome all sorts of contact. About 4 years ago, a very close relative of mine in his late 80s developed all kinds of extremely serious, even fatal illnesses, and was failing rapidly finally over a period of several months. Got to a certain point, the whole family gathered around him, and he was in hospice care. In a hospice center, not at home, but plenty of people are in what's called hospice, and we'll find out more about that at home. And finally, everybody agreed, since he was not able to speak or to give any opinion about anything himself, agreed when the nurse suggested at the hospice care that she would take him off all of his other medications that were basically keeping him alive, because he was in a tremendous amount of pain, and just leave him on a morphine drip. And finally, he died somewhat sooner than he might have otherwise, but maybe we're talking about a matter of days or weeks at the most. And that's what happened. But this issue of people being in hospice, and sometimes, on certain painkillers, usually morphine, a morphine drip or morphine liquid or whatever, and then, sometimes taking their own lives, or with somebody who's in their own family or somebody who's attending to them. Maybe some of you saw the film Magnolia. Finally, people can't stand it anymore, and out of love, of all things, they just want to help this person who has stated, when they're in their right mind and able to speak, that they want out, that they can't take this kind of life anymore, the pain and the helplessness. And they make their decision, and people help them. And yet it is still, in most places, a felony to help people do this. And tonight we're going to talk about a specific case and the general issue of assisted suicide. And we have with us Jessica Grennan, who's the... Oh, hi, Jessica. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing tonight?
I'm all right. Let me just introduce you. Jessica is the National Field and Political Director of Compassion and Choices. And what is Compassion and Choices? Compassion and Choices is the biggest and longest acting nonprofit in the country on ensuring end of life choice and care. Mm-hmm. And how long has it been around? It's been around for over 30 years. And who founded it? Why was it founded? It was founded by folks that wanted to make sure that loved ones and other people in their life had options at the end of life for peace and for choice. Mm-hmm. So who funds this? We have a lot of individual donors who really care about making sure that people are given all of their choices at the end of their life. Let me go over the case, and if I get anything wrong here, you can tell me. I just want people to understand what this case is, and you can talk about. I'll tell you. Yeah. Okay. What kind of phone are you using there? We're having a little trouble with hearing you clearly. Oh, okay. Let me just try to adjust. Is that better? A little better. You're on a cell phone? I am, unfortunately. Oh, okay. All right. So the case we're talking about occurred and is actually sort of still occurring in Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, I'm going to read this, and I think I got this maybe from your website, but let's see. Authorities claim in Pennsylvania that Barbara Mancini, and she's a nurse too, right? Okay. Yes, she is an RN. Okay, so she handed her 93-year-old father, whose name is Joe Yershaw, who was enrolled in home hospice care because he wanted to die at home, a partially filled bottle of his prescribed morphine at his request to relieve his pain, and then he drank it. A hospice nurse arrived 1.5 hours later to check on him and found him unresponsive. She ignored Barbara, that is the daughter's instructions, as her father's healthcare proxy to honor his do not resuscitate order and let him die at home. Now the visiting nurse, the hospice nurse, called 911, ignoring all this other stuff. The emergency medical technicians arrived and took the man, Joe, to the hospital, while a police captain arrested Barbara, the nurse, the daughter, for assisted suicide. The man was revived. Joe was revived at the hospital, where he was given more morphine to treat his symptoms and died 4 days later. Compassion and Choices and Pain Treatment Topics, I guess another organization, have filed an amicus brief supporting the defense's motion to dismiss this case. And it says here, the case should be dismissed because even if Barbara Mancini, the woman who did this, handed medication to her dying father, by performing this typical family caregiver task, she acted in a manner beyond reproach. As a dying patient, Joe Yershaw had the right, recognized both by the Supreme Court and through medical practice, to as much pain medication as he needed to get relief, even if it would advance the time of death. And this last bit, continued prosecution of Barbara Mancini could make millions of other families rightfully fear that providing home hospice caregiving for their dying relatives could put them in prison. This outcome would be tragic for dying patients nationwide. So just on this case now, she's still fighting this in court, right? She is. She faces 10 years in prison if found guilty. 10 years? Wow. Yes. And she's lost her job at an emergency room, right? She has. It's been a strain on the family, and her husband is an EMT in Philadelphia, working double shifts. It's just tragic. So, at what point is she in the legal process? There is a motion to dismiss, and we're waiting for the judge's ruling right now. To dismiss the charge entirely? To dismiss, yes. And the reason for this is that, among other things, the Supreme Court has had a case like this before it, and various judges have written opinions saying that people do have this right to take pain medication if they're in such dire circumstances, even if it will hasten death. The Supreme Court has already said this, right?
Absolutely. And this Joe Yershaw wanted to take the morphine. He took the morphine, and this is just ridiculous what's happening to Barbara. The other point that wasn't mentioned out in the hospital room, Mr. Yershaw was yelling, "Don't hurt Barbara! Don't hurt Barbara!" And that was his last memory on this earth.
So he knew that so he was aware enough to know that she was in trouble.
Yes.
So basically, this is also kind of hearsay. I mean, nobody was there to see exactly what happened, right?
No, and this just jeopardizes all in-house care and jeopardizes the relationship with the caregiver and the patient.
What does hospice care mean exactly?
Hospice care is used when someone has, you generally sign up for hospice when you have 6 months or less to live, which is a terminal definition. And the goal of hospice, much like midwifery, prepares someone to enter into the world of hospice works on leaving the world. It works with family. It works with patients. It works on pain. It works on symptom management. It helps people be able to say goodbye. At Compassion and Choices, we're huge fans of hospice. Most of our clients are in hospice.
Now, hospice can occur in a facility and also at home, right?
It varies place to place, yes.
Now, when it's provided at home, then the company, this is a private company that sent this nurse over. She was there. She came once a week, right? Now, do they have certain rules about things that were violated as far as there was concerned?
I'm actually not in a position to speak about what rules this hospice company has or does not have.
So so as far as we're concerned, we should take her word for it, the daughter, Barbara, that she was asked for this medicine and she just handed it to him.
She allegedly handed it over. That's what the nurse was saying, not Barbara.
So,
but any way you shake it, Mr. Yershaw had the morphine and he took it.
And he was allowed to take. In other words, he was allowed to take it. The medical, his physician said, "Okay, we're sending him home. Here's his medicine. He can have as much as he wants." Right?
He was in a great deal of pain, and he can take his medicine. He has that right to take medicine to relieve pain.
Now, obviously, you wouldn't be involved with this organization if you didn't believe that people at a certain point in their life, which is to say the point very near death, especially if they're in pain, have a right to make a choice. But where do you draw the line with this? Like, for instance, what if somebody has a history of mental illness but is perfectly physically healthy, but they just have recurring episodes of mental illness, which can be so frightening and horrifying that life isn't worthwhile for them or hardly anybody else around them, and they decide they want to end their life? How does that work?
With the Death with Dignity Acts across the country, we work to make sure mentally competent, terminally ill, and terminal illness, as I just mentioned, refers to a condition of 6 months or less.
So it would have to be a physical condition then?
Yes, and someone that can self-administer. We want to make sure choices are available. So, and as you just also asked, absolutely, I feel so privileged to get to fight for the rights of dying people.
Well, is this based on anything personal in your life?
It's based on, yeah, actually it is. I had a grandmother that I was terribly close with, whose oncologist told her at 81 years old when she had colon cancer how disappointed she was for not doing the last round of treatment. And the poor woman was in agony.
And she was definitely within a few months of death?
She was in a great deal of pain and agony, and she lost so much of herself towards the end. It was a tough experience.
Well, obviously, then you must feel, and I think probably I certainly would feel this way. And I'm interested in hearing what my listeners will call in, in the next.
I am too.
Well, we'll see if they're interested in calling in about it. But sometimes I think this is a topic which actually makes people so scared because it involves mortality and something so scary that sometimes people don't even want to think about it or talk about it. But I know.
I think that's absolutely true. But once you get your what I've found with my volunteers, who are the best in the world, I have amazing volunteers with this issue and amazing staff. And I think once you get this settled in your mind of what you want and knowing you have choices, our folks are the most joyful and funny and bright and amazing people. So I would urge folks to have these conversations with their loved ones.
Now, I think that should go for each of us, too. Like, for instance, I'm sure you would agree, and I certainly agree, that if I got to the point where I was given a terminal diagnosis by authorities that I considered, intelligent and competent, and I was in such tremendous pain, I would like to, but let me ask you this question. What if it was, let's say he gets this diagnosis, you've got, no more than 6 months to live, and he's in some pain, and the day after he gets the diagnosis, when he's still, let's say, more in his right mind than he would have been, 6 months later or 5 months later, he says, all right, give me that bottle, I'm going to do it right now. That's his choice, right?
Yes, but that, rarely happens. People work with their physicians on this, and what I think is really interesting is that the vast majority of people in Oregon, where we have really great data, who ask for a prescription or who want to talk to their doctor about it in the first conversation don't end up using it. But having that prescription is like the ultimate insurance policy. It gives them the freedom to live, knowing that they have choice and control about their death.
Oh, so it's really fascinating. So that's knowing that they have control over their death gives them more freedom to choose to live if they want.
Absolutely. There's a palliative effect knowing you have options. When you have a really tricky cancer diagnosis, a lot of your choices are taken away from you at that moment. And you're out of control and you're trying to figure out what's going on and make plans. And knowing that you have some control over those last days, and that you can say, no, I don't want that treatment, or yes, I want that treatment, or I want to be able to talk to my doctor about a painless end. That is an option, and it does provide so much relief for people to know that that exists.
Why are there laws against assisted suicide?
I think a lot of it really has to do with religious reasons.
So you mean, for instance, that it's God who created people and only God can take a life?
And I would also ask that we not call this assisted suicide.
Oh, sure. What? I'm just, I'm...
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have this conversation. Okay. We prefer aid in dying or death with dignity. Suicide implies that there's a difference between life and death. There
is a difference between life and death.
There is. But someone who is dying of ovarian cancer, they don't have that option. They are actively dying. They're not given the option to live or... Oh,
I see. In other words, life, fate, biology, whatever, has put them in a position where they don't have a choice.
Yeah, they're actively dying. They want control over the time and place of their death. But it's a very different pathology than suicide.
So
many of our clients would be really... It really hurts their feelings to hear it described as suicide.
But suicide is literally, it means self-kill or self-death, right?
It does. I took Latin also.
I never took Latin.
But there is...
So, I mean, basically, so are we just talking about semantics, or you just don't want to use that word because it has a pejorative, effect?
I think it has a pejorative effect for sure, and I also think it's inaccurate. Well, if you look at the Latin roots of it, it does mean self-death or self-kill.
Yeah.
I don't think that's accurate for this situation, for what we're talking about and how suicide is used in popular vernacular.
Well, I can understand why you would want to rephrase it so that it makes it seems less harsh or brutal. Just personally, from my point of view, I don't mind it. I mean, if I was in the same position, and maybe one day I will be, and somebody said, "Do you want to die?" and I'd say, "Yes, I do. Here, hand me that bottle. I am going to kill myself." I don't have any problem with that, but I can understand why your organization would want to say that. What states are there now that have enlightened laws about this?
So Oregon was the first state, and they've had the law for years. And then we moved on to Washington. And my home state of Montana, also where I am right now, also has a court decision that allows for end-of-life choice. Vermont this year passed it in the legislature.
And any place else?
And Hawaii has a constellation of laws that allows for end-of-life choice.
So are these issues, are these changes to laws being debated actively in other states?
Absolutely. In New Jersey this year, we have made it out of a committee, and we'll be debating this on the floor later in the year.
Mm-hmm.
Connecticut, it should be brought up again next year. Massachusetts, the same. And I think we'll see more and more people discussing, and more and more citizens demanding choice at end of life. The amount of people that want end of life choice, it's a huge polling. It's a huge number. If I ever worked on a campaign this popular, I'd be taking most of October off.
Where do you draw the line? What if somebody told me I had a year to live and then gave me the medicine? I mean, why say 6 months?
6 months was determined as, it's a medical and legal term for terminal is 6 months or less.
But who decides that?
Who decides the 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, who came up with that? Why can't I say it's a year?
It's a really good question. It's just been the law in other states, and it's what eligibility is for hospice too.
Oh, maybe it has something to do with insurance costs and insurance companies.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, well, they don't want to be paying for a year, 6 months is more their stuff. Maybe 1 day if they had any say over it. So this issue, if people wanted to, right now, this woman Barbara Mancini is. She's probably going to need money for a legal cost. Is that right?
I would imagine so. From what I've seen in the articles, they're up to.
Is there a way?
90,000.
90,000? Whoa!
Mm-hmm.
And her husband is working like double shifts now just to make up the. Yeah. So what? Is there a place where people can go to help her legal fund?
Compassion and Choices website.
Compassion and Choices, is it .org?
.org. Yes.
Compassionandchoices.org. Yeah. Go ahead.
And it's spelled, the and is spelled out.
Okay, compassion and choices.org. Is that the only issue that the Compassion and Choices works with? Is there anything else?
We work on all of end of life.
Like what? Like what, for instance?
Including pain management, making sure that that hospitals and doctors are following clients' instructions on pain. We work to make sure advanced directives are being honored.
Mm-hmm.
We work to educate the general public on these are your options on choice. We work to make sure that unwanted treatment doesn't happen, that treatment is what the client and the patient wants. We really want to make sure that patients and citizens they're voicing what they want at end of life. I just saw a sticker in my car. It said, my life, my death, my choice. And that sums up what we work on.
These do not resuscitate documents that people sign. Are they a recent thing?
They've been around for a while, but the other thing that we make sure that folks have is a medical proxy that will stand up for your rights.
What is a medical? Also, medical proxy just being a person that's appointed in case you're incapacitated.
Yes, and we want to make sure that folks have one, so they have someone in there, and we want to make sure folks are talking to their medical proxy before it's in a healthcare emergency.
Uh-huh.
This should be a conversation that you have at Thanksgiving. This should be a conversation that you have often. So if someone has to make those decisions for you, they're empowered to make those decisions.
Well, when this nurse showed up at this place, and there's a do not resuscitate document, and the health proxy is officially this daughter, who on earth is she's the one who broke the law?
Yeah.
The visiting nurse is the one who broke the law.
It's a really tricky situation, and that's why it's really important that patients demand that their doctors follow their healthcare proxy. Talking to your doctors, to your hospital before an emergency situation is so important.
But they all knew. But this company knew that she had this.
Yes, it's this is an unjust prosecution and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
I think it's embarrassing, and I think it's a total waste of money there's so many better uses than a prosecution on this devoted daughter.
It seems to me that something you said earlier is the entire problem here. If you subtracted, like if it was a mathematical equation and you subtracted religion from this, it wouldn't even exist.
That's my feeling on it, and I think and to be fair, people of all religious beliefs support end-of-life choice. Mm-hmm. And people want this option for themselves across the political spectrum, across the religious spectrum, and across the country. People want their choice at end of life.
I doubt if there's anybody who's actually a rabbi or a minister or a priest that would agree with this.
I disagree with that, and I have supporters that are rabbis and rabbis, yes, across the country. Huh. And I'd be happy to send you their statements of support of end-of-life choice.
Very interesting. I'm surprised to hear that, but I guess that's because there is something called intellectual evolution. People do get...
My stepfather's a former priest.
What's that?
My stepfather's a former priest.
Ah, really?
And I was a little nervous to tell him what I was working on.
Oh, wow.
I was just a little nervous.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how Peter would feel about this. But he called me after I took this job and told me how proud he was of me. Huh. And this is someone that sat bedside for years, watching people suffer needlessly and feel lost because they didn't have choices.
Right. That's something he would do in the course of his profession, obviously.
Absolutely. He understood.
Hmm.
And, we see support across the religious spectrum. I'm Catholic, and I am so proud to work on this issue. We have Episcopalian reverends who are vocally out there and testifying for us at legislative sessions. We have rabbis testifying, and we have support across all religions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think, this is just my own personal opinion, so it doesn't really, you don't have to be associated with this, but I think as people tend to grow up, they tend to let formal religion rule their lives less as they tend to grow up. But that's another whole conversation. So,
I think that's right. I think after a certain point, I think folks they don't sweat the. I think that's right. I think they realize that people deserve options and choices.
Yeah, there it is. The least of it is let's say if you think you're religious and this shouldn't be done, but don't impose your wishes or will, and certainly make it into a law for anybody else to have to do what you want. That's up to you.
Absolutely.
All right. So again, it's we've been talking with Jessica Grennan, who's the National Field and Political Director of Compassion and Choices, and it's compassionandchoices.org. So you can go on there, and I'm sorry, did you say there was a way where people can help her out financially?
I think that will be up soon.
Oh, okay.
But
okay.
I urge you to sign up on our list, and we'll make sure you know everything that's going on with the trial.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on and talking about it. And I'm going to go to my listeners now and have them call up, but you don't have to stick around for that. I want to hear what people have to say, because I tend to get...
do.
Huh? Do you really? Do we have any calls? Yeah, hold on. And the number here, if you want to call in, is 866-997-4748. 866-997-4748. And we have, I think, at least... I'm just checking now. Do we have a call? No, we don't. Okay, he I guess maybe he had a religious opinion, and we don't really need to hear that.
He might be getting excited for the Red Sox game that's coming up soon, too. That's a possibility.
So now they're out in St. Louis, right?
Yes, they are tonight.
Oh, is it tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Then I don't have to watch regular TV. I can watch the game. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and I'm going to take a break now, and then maybe I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal experiences with some family members I had, like I did at the beginning of the show, and maybe my own attitude about it. And then I'll probably deal with some other issues too. All right, Jessica Grennan, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Good night.
Let's go to a break now, and hear what they have to say. And I don't want to actually have to hear it in the studio, because I may have to ask you to help me commit suicide if I have to hear these commercials. Go ahead. Okay, we do. Let's have Charles. You're on, Charles.
Good evening.
Hey.
I know a little bit about the two groups that are trying to create their own states within states.
Right. Well, there's a few others that I could have invited on, but I had to limit it to 2 people.
Oh, I understand. I don't know all of them.
Yeah.
I do know that the group out there in Colorado is so right-wing they make Ted Cruz look like a moderate.
Yeah. Well, that we didn't. I asked them a bunch of questions, and they started getting evasive. Like, for instance, about the minimum wage. They really don't want any minimum wage. They want no corporate taxes, and of course, they want anybody over the age of 10 to be able to carry a machine gun.
Oh yeah. Along with that, they have no businesses. The one guy was talking about the coal they have out there. That's basically dirt that burns.
Mm-hmm.
That's how low grade it is, and the rest of it's all just cattle production. They have a few areas where people go skiing, but that's about it.
Well, do you think
Maryland?
Yeah, go ahead.
In Western Maryland, that guy's dreaming if he thinks he's got 600,000 people out there. Unless Carroll County has gotten really bigger in population.
But do you think there's anything about any of their arguments that make any sense at all? Because after all, clearly the people in the federal government are almost completely unrepresentative of what the average American wants, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. I don't consider the people in Washington representative of anything that I or anybody I know really wants. Like, they keep having wars, spending money on spying, you name it. They don't go after rich people as much as they should. I think they're completely unrepresentative. They're all a bunch of millionaires, and the rest of us aren't. They don't care about the minimum wage that much. So isn't there something to some argument where some people say, you know what, I don't have a representative government. Let me create a new government here that is more representative?
Well, basically what has to be done is that you're going to have to get people to organize. I've been trying my best as a single individual, 1 or 2 people at a time, because you have to have a movement to change government. And we've had some minor starts, fits and starts with Occupy and other groups along those lines. I mean, you do have to have a lot more civil disobedience. It takes a movement to change our government. You have to have a parade going down there, which gives them the idea, hey, maybe I should lead this.
Well, obviously, I'm in the same boat you are. I mean, the reason I do this show and have been doing this for like 35 years is that I believe that we need to work with the government we have, but to radically change it. I'm not in the mood to go off and form my own state. I want to take the state we do have and the federal government we have and have it actually pay attention to its own citizens. That's where I'm at.
That's where I'm at also. The only thing I would think to do is when I hear some of these idiots going off here, is to run off to the nearest gun store, buy an AR-15 with lots of ammunition, stand in front of the Capitol building and the White House, facing away from them and saying, don't you dare try to take on my government. Unless you're planning on changing it with elections and votes and movement, I don't want to hear you.
So the idea of turning your back on the established way things are and forming your own government just does not appeal to you in any way.
No, I see no reason to do so. We fought blood for this government. We need to change it to where it listens to us. And
all right.
It's listened to these idiots already, which is why we have all these people in there now who aren't listening to us, because the opportunities have been set and the rules were changed.
You know what? I'm gonna have to get off because actually, unfortunately, your signal is almost unlistenable too. I mean, it's just the way the technology is. I can hardly even hear you. So, but we have heard.
Sorry about that.
No, it's not your fault. I'm just saying we can't hear you very well. So, try again if you want. You must be on the road, right?
Yes, I am. I used to be a school teacher, and now I'm a truck driver. Obviously, a glutton for punishment.
All right. We're going to move on. Thanks for calling.
All right, take care now.
You too. Who do we have? Louis from Asbury Park. You're on.
Hey, Mike. How you been?
Hey, I'm doing all right.
Great. Hey. Listen, I want to talk about the end of life.
Can you talk up a little bit? Speak a little louder.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about the end of life.
Yeah, go ahead.
With the guest you just had. You know what? I was raised a Catholic. And I'm long lapsed a Catholic. I'm not practicing anymore. And as a Catholic, I have a family that's very much against end of life, abortion, everything. I never had an issue with assisted suicide as a Catholic. It's interesting. I was no problem with anyone that wants to do it, even in my own life if I needed to.
Well, but all those things have something in common, which is that, the basic thing is that God gave you life and man that includes yourself cannot take it away. I'm just saying that's what they say.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. But this woman hit on something very key, Mike. When I felt I didn't have options, I rebelled and I said, "This seems wrong to me to have someone suffer." But what's interesting now is I've changed and opened up myself, and I lean a little more towards Buddhist beliefs, where my conscience bothers me now in the idea of that you shouldn't take life in a Buddhist concept. So I've kind of gone the other way, but that's by having options. But I've also had two experiences in my life. I had a friend last year that died, and I had to go through that process, sitting bedside because the family wasn't around, so I had it by proxy. He was in a coma, and he slowly was dying. At the last day, the nurse came in, and his morphine prescription was on a low drip, and he was lingering, and he wouldn't die, and this nurse just pushed it way up the morphine, and slowly my friend passed away. And that's courage that nurse, because he knew I wasn't going to have any issues with it, because I was honoring my friend's wishes. That's what he wanted. I wasn't letting my religion get in the way, or my beliefs, because those are his wishes, and I have a brother that has me set up for the same reason, because he knows I'm not going to get crazy like my family. He literally says he wants me to rescue my body from my family and the Catholics.
So
it is interesting. The woman touched on options, and I think that is really key.
Do you have living will, healthcare proxy, do not resuscitate? Do you have all that?
Absolutely, just like my friend and my brother.
I think sometimes this is almost like a generational thing. When you get to be over 50 or so, considering the way the world is today, it's probably something to look into, because otherwise, religions, the medical establishment, whatever stupid laws exist in your state will take that option away from you.
They will.
Yeah.
Well, I also wonder, when I was with my friend last year when he passed, it was out in California. And I have a feeling, being in California, even the hospital handled the whole situation a lot different than it might be in other areas of the country. They were a lot more open-minded. The nurses were unbelievable. Like, it was time for him to go.
Oh, yeah.
They were going to make sure.
I think the health insurance companies actually would like people to go sooner.
Oh, absolutely.
Then they don't have to pay for that much more medicine that day, So they're on our side.
But we're hearing the argument that it's really Obama that wants you to die.
Oh, but it's not Obama. The health insurance companies want you to die. They want you to die this second, so they don't have to spend one more penny on you.
I have a brother-in-law that's going through that process right now. He has lung cancer, and now he's in that insurance company hell.
Yeah, sure.
They really don't want him to hang on.
No,
they don't.
No, they want you dead. I mean, if you have anything to do with an insurance company, they would be very happy to hear that you died, and that's less money they have to pay out. But
that woman does good work, so hopefully it'll. You can't stop progress, Mike. At some point, this is going to be in every state. It'll progress through most.
I agree, and I think it's always, and to me, it's a process of actually, as I told her, it's growing up. It's growing up emotionally and intellectually, and not imposing your superstitions on other people.
Right on.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for calling.
All right. See you.
Okay, Louis. Who do we have? Paul in Texas. You're on, Paul.
Hey, Mike, first on the end-of-life issue, man, I lost my sister. She had leukemia, and, didn't lose her. I was the person that she selected to make her final decisions. And I got to tell you, that's one of the toughest choices you have to make in this world.
Yeah, I in this case, I was talking about my relative. I didn't make that decision because there were a couple of people who were closer to him in terms of family stuff. But if I had to make that choice about, God forbid, about my wife or whatever, my parents are long gone. But if I had to make that choice, let's say about my wife, I mean, do you really want to be the one who actually ends someone's life no matter how much you see them suffering? That's a really rough one.
Mike, the moment she found out she had leukemia, she looked at me and said, I don't want no one else in charge if I can't respond.
Mm-hmm.
What was I supposed to do, man? But the point I'm trying to make is I don't want anybody, but you see, when religion and everybody gets in the way, it gets messy. It really gets messy because that's a very hard decision to make. And I really, I appreciate you bringing that lady on and talking about it. It's just a tough subject for me to discuss
Yeah.
So all I'm going to say is it was a very hard decision to make, and I just prefer people to leave that be a personal thing. It's like abortion. It's a personal thing. It's very personal, man. People should just stay away from that stuff. Just let the person decide. Person whose job it is to decide.
Yeah, I agree. Religions, all religions always talk about heaven and paradise, except actually for the Buddhists and somewhat the Jews. But most religions talk about heaven and paradise. Here's my idea of heaven and paradise, the kingdom of heaven, call it that. If tomorrow morning we all woke up and there wasn't one church, one synagogue, one mosque, and all the Bibles, all of this stuff just disappeared. There were no ministers, rabbis, or imams. If it just suddenly overnight disappeared, we would have a paradise on earth.
Yeah, I agree. I was born Greek Christian. I was born and raised Greek Christian Orthodox, man. So I'm very far away from that religion right now. So I've been far away from it for a long time. To me, mythology is something that should just be just mythology. Anyway. The other subject I want to touch on, which the first two guests you had on,
yep,
the ones that want to secede from their state. Okay, I kind of look up to.
Well, they don't want to secede. They want to just carve a piece out of it and create a new state.
Right. Well, secede from the state and create their own
true.
state.
That's true.
Okay. But yeah, there's a city in California that wants to do the same thing. Hey, why is it that all three regions that want to do this all tend to vote Republican now? And here's the thing. Is they're the ones that are more represented. If you go to the House, because they occupy a larger area but fewer people, they're the ones that are mostly represented in the House of Representatives.
Well, see, that's an important point. They are overrepresented. In fact, the people who live in rural areas have far more representation and more effect in the capital than people who live in urban areas.
Exactly, like New York, right? And a district in New York has a lot more people in it for one representative than does, say, a place in upstate New York, which is a lot more rural. And you're being a New Yorker like me. You heard this, that upstate always supports downstate. And I look at these people and say, most of you work in New York City and go upstate and take the tax money. What are you talking about? The tax base in New York City is much higher than upstate. It's the same thing with the area in Maryland, because I kind of looked this up while you had the guests on. I was kind of hoping you'd let them take callers, because I had one question to ask them. When they talk about fair representation, when these two sections become state, they get 2 senators apiece.
That's right.
That will be six more Republican senators that will represent a lot fewer people than the 2 senators that represent New York State, or the 2 senators that would represent the entire state of California.
And then now you're really talking about unequal representation. It's a good point you're bringing up.
Exactly. So I want if you do get a chance to bring them back on, especially the guy.
Well, actually, who I'm going to bring on is I had a chance to bring on the guy from Texas, who is a real show. Let me tell you. And so the next time I have this guy on, next time I have somebody on to do this, it'll be the guy from Texas.
Well, I would appreciate having, for at least the guy from Maryland. So I'm going to go on their website, see if I can email this guy. I want to start a conversation. I want to understand how he feels he's being slighted as compared to my family and my friends in New York, who, 900,000 or 1 million people for one representative? His section's got, 10,000 people for one representative? Are we serious? If you want to make it equal, and you want to actually go up based on the Constitution, because these were his words. The Constitution, when they made the Constitution, each area had 10,000 people. Well, and he wants to base that number for 10,000 for their new states. Well, that slights the existing states and cities like New York, and Washington, who gets no representation, they say it's a lot more people living in that area. So if we actually took his 10,000 number, you know how many House of Representatives we'd need in a 300 million people nation? 30,000 people, 30,000 representatives, 30,000. Has he thought of that?
Well, we can only have 30,000 representatives if we reduce their pay to $8 an hour. That way, we could have 30,000 representatives.
There you go. I mean,
I got to take another call. I got to move on.
All right, man. Okay.
Okay, Paul. Who do we have? Eugene in Virginia. You're on, Eugene.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I was just calling about that end of life. It was a great section. you were talking about why it wasn't a year,
Oh, yeah.
6 months instead of, who chose that. When I asked that to hospice, what they said was, with a year, you still have, it's a large enough period of time for things to change. When they say 6 months or less, it's really imminent.
So, in other words, if it's just 6 months, they're 99.999% sure that that's the end and that's it. Nothing could turn around. If it's a year, it's more like maybe 88% or something.
Right. That's the kind of story I got.
Yeah, I see. But, there's another the question I asked her, and, I guess people don't disagree about it so much, but I wonder is like, and this is something because I've had personal experience with this, there are people who have such severe mental illness, and people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and it never goes away. It keeps coming back. Sometimes medicine doesn't control it, and you're in a living hell when you're in this state. I mean, since I've been in it, I can talk about it. You're like in hell. You're not really alive, and you don't even want to be alive. And so there are people who, when they're in when they have severe mental illness, are suicidal, and yet, would it be right to allow them to, or to help them end their lives?
Well, a question of quality over quantity. And if there's no hope, I mean, you just mentioned that you were there, so now you're not.
That's true. That's true. So maybe I'm an argument for the fact that people shouldn't be allowed to take their lives, because not so long ago, I felt like doing it, but now I certainly don't.
And you certainly provided a hell of a contribution, so your loss would have been significant.
But I'm a little cynical. In fact, there's a famous book written by a French author named Louis Ferdinand Celine, Celine, and it's called Death on the Installment Plan. And you know what he calls life itself Death on the Installment Plan, because it's such a struggle, But that's the point. Yeah. Life is a constant struggle. If everybody just gave up, where would we all be? I don't know. Anyway.
I look at it, I figure if I really didn't think there was something else after this, I would have ended it a long time ago.
Oh, wait. You think there's another world after this one?
Well, I think there's a continuation, yes.
But would you be, is something you'd be conscious of, or just some place that some part of you goes? Would you know who you were in this next world?
I think there is a transition so that there is an awareness, but it's more like
but you know what? Listen, hold on a second.
Continued string of living.
Okay, wait, we have I'm getting a signal from my engineer. Do we have another call? Yeah, we have one more call. I'm sorry, we got to move on. Take one last call for the hour. Thanks for calling. What do we have? Tony in New Mexico. You're on, Tony.
How you doing?
Hey.
Hey, I'm pretty lefty, but man, you're left of me. That's real left.
I guess I am.
I used to be as left as you, but I read a book called The Next 100 Years. Have you ever read that book?
No. Who's the author?
Man, I'm not good at that part of when I read books.
Okay, so it's called The Next 100 Years. And what is the point of the book?
Well, he really broke down to me how our military is set up all around the world and how it does preserve a certain amount of peace/certainty. Our navies cruise the Atlantic and the Pacific, so no country even stands a chance of ever coming near us. We're so powerful. I think our military is bigger than the next 10 militaries put together.
And that's a good thing, right?
Well, you think that everything would just go peaceful here if there wasn't a military here. We would have all kind of threats from countries wanting a piece of what we have to domestic issues. He also broke down based on the reasons that we went to war, you could easily see how a president can say, well, we're going to go to war with Mexico, but for geopolitical reasons, all presidents really stay away from that. But that's a real dividing point because I'm down here in New Mexico, and there are desperados coming across the border committing murders, and it's a real threat that if somebody don't like you here, they can make a phone call across the border and have you taken out. You know, people in the Midwest and the East Coast really don't.
You know what? All right. Thanks for calling. We're gonna move on. Take one more call. Who do we have? Lori, you're on. Lori, I can only give you about 2 minutes.
Hi, Mike.
Hiya.
Hey, I just wanted to talk about the end of life thing real briefly here, and I just wanted to say, you know, you were talking about religion, and that's a lot of the reason why we have people being so reticent about assisted suicide and whatnot. But I think overall our country is really afraid of death. It's a topic that people have a really hard time with, and I think that's what the main cause of it is, besides religion.
You know, that's a very good point. But of course, that's universal. It's not just this country.
Yeah, Western civilization, I think, is a little worse on it than some of the others.
That's true. That's true.
But also, you know, this is a topic that has been studied, you know, very extensively, starting with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and the whole hospice movement grew out of her work, one woman's work, really. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of books, a lot of research on it, and, you know, so it's not like nobody knows what happens after you die, because there's been so much documentation on it. And,
whoa. There can't be any documentation on what happens after you die.
Well, they're near-death experiences.
Oh, that. Yeah, well, those are reports by people. There's no documents or Exhibit A or B or C. It's what they say they experience, right?
Yeah, and that's the documentation I'm talking about.
Well, documentation,
The studies, when you do a study, you then have documentation. So
that's true, but I mean, it's based on it's just based on what somebody said they experienced or they saw. They can't produce somebody from the other side. They can't show you, a shovel that somebody presented them, you know, as a gift. I mean, there's nothing except there is a little bit of that. Yeah.
If you read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, there is a little bit of.
So we only have like 30 seconds. Do you believe that there is another world after this one?
Absolutely. It's so well documented that I think it would be a little bit on the ignorant side to disbelieve that.
Is George Bush going to be in it?
I hope not. Let's hope and pray, because I don't want to be there with him.
Yeah, but if there's another world, he gets to be in it the same as you, right?
Well, it's a lot more expensive than what we've got going here. So I think that all of these ideas that we are dealing with here